Naruto was slow to return to his senses from his place on the ground. With a slight groan, he began to stir, and the first thing he saw as his eyes cracked open was Sasuke's foot inches before his face, and the masked boy he and his teammate had been fighting lying sprawled out on the concrete. "Geez, you always get in the way," Sasuke said, putting him down as always. But that didn't matter right now. If Sasuke had managed to get them out of this, Naruto would take back everything bad he'd ever said about him. Not like he didn't know how good Sasuke was, even if he hated admitting it. "Sasuke, you dash." But as he looked up, the triumph and gratitude he felt turned to ash. Coldness settled in the pit of his stomach as he saw the needles riddling Sasuke's body, while over a dozen littered his arms, his legs, his back. 5 of them stuck out of his neck, leaking blood as he coughed up a wad of crimson that added to the splashes the blonde just now noticed. "What's with that face, idiot?" Sasuke asked as he looked over his shoulder. His tone was the same as always, but only now did Naruto notice how he was struggling to speak, how strained he sounded. "Why?" Naruto started, unsure what to say. They'd hated each other. Anyone who knew them could tell. He should have been the last person Sasuke would lay down his life for. And yet, "I don't know," Sasuke answered weakly. "I hated you," he admitted, wondering about the answer himself. "So why save me?" Naruto repeated. He clenched his teeth, angry at Sasuke for doing something so stupid, at the masked boy for doing this to him, at himself for running into what was obviously some kind of jutsu and getting them in this mess. "Stupid, stupid, stupid. I never asked for your help." Sasuke took a breath and just stood for a moment. My body just moved by itself. And with that, his remaining strength left him and he fell backward. Naruto caught him, mind racing as he tried and failed to process what was happening, eyes wide as he realized how shallowly his rival was breathing. "That man, my brother. I swore I would live until I killed him," Sasuke said weakly, dull eyes focused on the blonde. Some part of Naruto was perplexed by that admission, but it was small compared to the part screaming that his rival was about to die in his arms, to do something, but he couldn't move. "Don't let yourself die too." And with that, the Uchiha's eyes closed, and the faint movements of his breathing ceased. A tear fell from Naruto's eye. There was a burning feeling inside, different from the pain constricting his heart, swelling by the second. "He charged at me without hesitation and died protecting you. For that, he deserves respect," he heard the masked boy say as he rose to his feet. "Is this the first time you've witnessed the death of a friend? This is the way of shinobi." And with that he slipped back into his mirror, his gaze not leaving his remaining opponent. "Shut up," Naruto said, quietly, focused on the unmoving body in his arms. "I hated you too, Sasuke, and yet." His thoughts turned back to the masked boy, and at that moment he saw red. "I won't forgive you." Crimson chakra erupted from the blonde, startling the masked boy within the mirror as it began to tear through the ground. So intense was the normally intangible energy that it carved deep lines in the stone as it spiraled out from the Genin's body. As he leaned forward, resting Sasuke on the ground, his entire body tensed. Fire coursed through his veins, his mind almost completely blank as all emotions were drowned out by pure, burning rage. "I'm gonna kill you," he almost roared, his voice a guttural growl as he bent forward, one hand laying Sasuke on the ground as the other clawed at the concrete. The Uzumaki rose to his feet, the wounds littering his body healing as he moved, Senbon pushed out by growing muscle mass, cuts and scrapes steaming as they faded away until he was left unharmed. Above him, the spiraling crimson coalesced, shifting and taking shape into the form of the upper skull of a fox, its lower half fading into haze like energy, its baleful gaze trained on the masked boy as Naruto's did too. His once blue eyes dyed crimson with slit pupils. Kakashi was startled by a sudden, intense chakra that washed over the battlefield. The air itself seemed to take on a slight, stinging charge filled with an almost palpable sense of rage. Immediately, his mixed coal and crimson gaze turned towards the source, where his students fought for their lives, hidden in the mist. It took him a moment to recognize it. It had been years since he'd felt it after all, and he didn't have a lot of experience with this type of power, but soon enough it came to him. The Kyuubi, has the seal broken? No doubt Zabuza felt it too, But that was an afterthought. No, it's just loosed and its power is seeping out. Something's happened. I need to get over there. I have to end this, right now. With that, he pulled a scroll from his vest and flipped it through the air. In a single smooth motion, he dipped his thumb in the wound on his chest, grabbed the scroll in midair, unfurled it, and ran his thumb along the paper, smearing the words written upon it with blood. Zabuza, the Jonin called out into the mist. I know how you like to stretch these things out, but how about we end this now? He said as he twirled the scroll through the air before forming the tiger hand seal. The scroll perched upon his thumbs. Come on, what do you say? We're both busy people. Tempting. Zabuza's voice echoed from all around him. I'm curious to see how you'll back up such brave words. Show me, Kakashi. Haku could only stare, perplexed by the sight before him. What is this? Such an evil chakra. It should be impossible for chakra to change like this. And there's so much. The air almost felt like it was on fire. The chakra seemed to radiate hatred like nothing he could have ever imagined. Even as it faded until only a haze like crimson aura remained around the blonde, the feeling of dread it instilled refused to leave him. The boy had healed, he noticed. All the wounds he'd inflicted had faded completely. But there was no time to dwell on that as Naruto suddenly bent forward, crossing his arms over his chest, a low growl emanating from his chest and growing louder by the second. What is? He raised his senbon. I have to dash. Before he could finish that thought, the blonde threw his head to the sky and roared. At that moment, 3 massive chains tipped with spikes and dyed with the same crimson power burst from his torso, each half as thick as his mirrors were wide. They whipped through the air, growing longer by the moment until they reached his mirrors and tore through them as if they were glass. They shattered instantly, the pieces scattering and quickly falling prey to gravity. What? It happened too quickly. In only 3 seconds, all his mirrors had been broken, the pieces falling to the ground. Knowing he had to move quickly, the masked boy tossed a volley of senbon from the piece he remained in and warped into one of the shards directly over the blonde. With another almost animalistic roar of fury, a wave of crimson chakra scattered the needles. But that was fine, it was just a distraction. The instant the blonde's attention was on the needles, Haku launched himself down with as much speed as he could muster, aiming to stab the enraged boy. It was not to be. Naruto jumped away, moving nearly as fast as he himself did with the assistance of the mirrors. No, I have to get away. Not fast enough. The blonde was on him almost the moment he completed the thought, his hand raised above his head, his hands clawed and displaying his now sharpened nails. Haku had just enough time to dodge, and the blonde's hand crashed down where he once stood, kicking up a cloud of debris. Trained instinct drove him, readying a counterattack before he even considered his next move. But it was a pointless effort. More chains, much smaller this time, burst from the cloud and surged towards the masked boy. He threw his senbon in desperation, unable to dodge in midair, but the blonde blocked with his arm while the masked boy was ensnared. With the same motion he'd raised his limb, he pulled back his fist as the chains reeled the ice user in. The fist slammed into his face with enough force to crack his mask. He was sent flying, the chains releasing him as he spiraled through the air before crashing into the ground and rolling to a stop, staring at the sky as half of his mask left his face and clattered on the ground. Just in time to see the chains coming down, their bladed tips poised to spear him. He had just enough time to realize what was coming, but his body refused to respond quickly enough, too dazed by the force of the blow. The chain slammed down in a spray of crimson liquid, and instantly he knew nothing but pain. True awareness gradually returned to the blonde as he stood, heaving as he breathed heavily. An outstretched hand pointed towards Sasuke's killer, his burning gaze honed in on the boy weakly crying out and writhing as he clutched at the blade-tipped chains of chakra embedded in his chest. As his breathing calmed down, the crimson energy began to fade. His ruby orbs faded back to blue, and gradually, his furious gaze gave way to horror. His breath picked up again, this time with a slight shudder as he processed the expanding crimson pool under the masked boy, the 4 chains buried deep in his chest. He took a shaky step back, the chains evaporating and fading away like smoke blown by the wind. The boy's writhing lessened, and he clutched at the red stain at his chest. He was still clinging to life, barely, but it was obvious to all that the wound was fatal. Naruto had killed him, just as he said he would. He tried to force himself to stop trembling, to ignore the cold pit that had opened up in his stomach. Shinobi had been trained for this. There was still danger. He had no idea what was going on with Kakashi, Sakura, and the old man who hired them. He needed to do. All he could think of was the boy dying a few yards away from him. He walked forward as fast as he could. Not very fast, but he recognized that the boy was soon to breathe his last, and he wanted to what? Hear his last words? Just stand there so he wouldn't die alone? He didn't know, but his feet carried him onward. He took in a quiet gasp when he drew close enough to make out the uncovered part of the boy's face. It was the same boy he met days ago gathering herbs. It's you, from the forest," Naruto said, his voice faint, shaking slightly. "I suppose this is your win." The boy spoke weakly, dull black eyes looking to Naruto for the second time that day as his arms now limp on his chest. "Be dashed, but why?" Naruto asked, and after a moment his voice grew more intense. "Why is someone like you working for scum like Zabuza? Why'd you kill Sasuke?" "Because he is important to me," the masked boy, whose name Naruto realized he didn't even know, said as he looked to the sky. "When I was alone, when no one acknowledged my existence, he took me in. For that, I owe him everything." He looked to him once more, his voice growing weaker with every word. "Do you know what it's like to be truly alone? To live in complete solitude?" The look on his face gave him the answer. "I see." And then his eyes closed, and his breathing stilled. Zabuza could sense it. Kakashi had used a jutsu, and for that he chided him. For all the Sharingan wielder's renown, he was helpless here in his mist. Just like so many others, they couldn't match Zabuza's skill in the art of silent killing. Not even his former compatriots in the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist could. Here, where sight was useless, where he could attack without a sound and detect even the faintest of movement, none could match him. None could escape his blade. "I think you're right, Kakashi. It's time I ended this." And that's when he sensed it. Something moving towards the ground, drowning out all the other faint sounds. The ground beneath him cracked, and then shattered, revealing a dog? It grasped at his foot with its jaws. A quick movement of his leg was all he needed to avoid it. He wasn't so fortunate when another followed, however, and its teeth bit into his shin. He cried out in pain before more hounds of various species, including an enormous bulldog, tore their way out of the ground around him, their howls filling the air. He struggled, to no avail, as he found himself completely pinned. His legs each had two dogs hanging onto them. His right arm had a single canine holding it in place, and the bulldog had bit into his shoulder, its huge paws holding his arm in place. The tables had turned. That's what happens when you wander with your eyes closed. Kakashi began as the mist began to clear, allowing them to see each other as he rose to his feet. "That was a summoning jutsu. I was calling forth my ninja hounds." Kakashi's mixed eyes met his. "When you attacked me, I let you get past my guard. I wanted you to cut me. It's the smell of my blood on your blade that led them to you. Falling into my trap? You disappoint me, Zabuza." Of course, he had to throw his words back at him. Kakashi put a hand to his face, right beside his eye. "The mist has cleared. Know what I see? Your future is death." Talk. Do you mean to talk me to death?" In a way, Kakashi replied. "Right now my hounds are just playing, but one word from me, and they'll tear you apart. But, as I said, we're both busy people. I need to get to my students. It's time I ended this, but it won't be with a stolen jutsu. For this, I'll use my own technique." And with that, he ran through 3 hand signs. Raikiri. A circle of azure chakra rose around him, lightning flying from it to an orb of pure chakra and electricity in his grasp. Wah! His chakra is so strong it's visible. "I won't let you sacrifice Tsunade for the sake of your own goals," Kakashi declared. "The bridge he seeks to build is the only hope of this country, sacrificing so many others to further your ambitions." He glared at him now, disapproval clear on the exposed portion of his face. That's not the way of the shinobi. Zabuza recovered from the shock of seeing so powerful a technique. Really, What was even the point of that? At this point, he could just throw a kunai into his jugular and he wouldn't be able to do anything. Flashy bastard just wants to show off. Well, if he wanted to waste that much chakra, fine by him. If he could get out of this, that would be to his advantage. I don't give a damn about their petty little lives, Zabuza responded, his voice determined as if he wasn't staring down certain death. I've got my own dreams, and I will make them a reality. Kakashi continued to stare, the orb of light crackling in his hand. I'll give you one last chance, surrender. Never. So be it. Kakashi charged forward. The swordsman of the mist did all he could, hoped that Haku would come to his side as always. But there was nothing he could do, and help never came. Pain erupted through his chest as the blade of lightning pierced him, running him clear through as easily as any metal sword. He coughed, and blood dyed the wrapping masking his face. Damn, guess Kakashi was right this time. Naruto had stepped away from the masked boy's body, eyes looking this way and that as he tried to gain his bearings. It was useless. This fog was so thick he might as well be stumbling around in complete darkness. And with all the moving around in the fight, he had no idea if he was going towards the others or the rails or even the edge of the bridge. Damn it, I can't tell east from west in this stupid fog. Never mind that he had trouble with that anyway. I have to find everyone, and... It was just then that the mist began to lighten up. Vague shapes began to form as it faded away by the moment. The mist is clearing. And then he saw two shapes, definitely human, standing inches apart in the fog. There. He ran towards them as his vision became sharper, and then he stopped. Kakashi was standing across from Zabuza, who was being held down by dogs of various shapes and sizes. But they didn't have to. Not when Kakashi's hand had torn clean through Zabuza's chest. The man was unmoving, blood splatters littering the ground in front of and behind him. His eyes were wide and sightless, looking blankly at Kakashi's face. The hounds released their prey, sitting obediently as Kakashi turned, kneeling as he moved to slide Zabuza's body off of his arm. He laid him onto the ground and slid his hands over his eyes, last rites for a fallen foe regardless of his opinion of the man. Kakashi-sensei, Naruto called out as he ran over, and he saw the man look towards him. Naruto, it's over on your end too? Naruto stopped and his face twisted as he looked away. Kakashi took in the complicated expression on his face and seemed to have a good guess of how the battle had ended. I see. Naruto. It was then a familiar voice rang out, one that Naruto had dreaded hearing. Sakura. He looked over to see the pink-haired girl waving at him, a happy smile on her face that the blonde knew wouldn't last. Are you okay? Where's Sasuke? Naruto just looked away, not able to force himself to say the words to her. Kakashi remained stoic as he took in Naruto's response, merely closing his eye for a moment as he slid his forehead protector back over his Sharingan eye. It was something he'd learned to do through the countless losses he'd endured through his years as a shinobi. This one, though, it was never easy to lose a comrade, no matter how well one might learn to handle it, but it was worse when it was your student. He could already guess what Sakura's reaction was. He rose from his crouched position, sparing Zabuza's body a single glance. That could be dealt with later. He half-turned to look at the bridge builder and Sakura, who was starting to tremble with a look of growing horror on her face. Come on, it looks like the fighting's over. And with that he walked towards Naruto, who stood there looking at the ground, his loyal ninja hounds following behind. He was grateful to Pakin for remaining silent. When he reached the blonde, he put a hand on his shoulder. Those blue eyes turned to him, and he gave him a reassuring squeeze before gesturing for him to follow. He seemed reluctant, and he could imagine why, but he started to turn all the same. As they walked through the clearing mist, the first sight they came upon was the body of the masked boy. There were more pressing matters, so the Jonin only spared the corpse a cursory glance. It wasn't what he expected. He had little experience with the power he had sensed from Naruto, but he had expected blunt force trauma or claws to be the cause of death, not impalement. And then they came to Sasuke lying on his back, eyes closed and needles dug deep into his neck and various places on his body. Tsunade looked away. Sakura fell to her knees. She reached for his face, likely wanting to confirm that it wasn't just a trick like during the bell test. He's cold, she noted quietly. This isn't an illusion. You can cry, Sakura. I won't think less of you, Kakashi said, and she turned a wavering green eye towards him. He could see it shimmering slightly. I know what the rules say. Feelings are a weakness. Shinobi aren't supposed to pursue their own goals. We're meant to be tools. But despite that, we're still human. At that, the floodgates opened, and Sakura fell over Sasuke as she sobbed out his name. He could hear Naruto's breathing catch beside him. Well, what do we have here? An oily voice rang out from the edge of the bridge. All save Sakura turned to see a short man in sunglasses, dressed in an expensive suit and a cane. He was smirking, amusement clear as he beheld them in the now almost completely faded mist. Behind him were dozens of men. Kakashi could immediately tell they were nothing more than thugs, likely only barely versed in chakra if at all. Gato, Tsunade growled. So this is… Heh, well, what do you know? Those two went and bit it before we even got here. Gato observed with a slight tile of the head. I guess I owe you a bit of gratitude. I was going to have them both killed after they ran themselves nice and ragged fighting you. But you went and took care of that part for me. So much for the hidden demon in the mist. The men behind him all laughed at him, mocking the dead man. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. Double dealing's a common tactic for swine like you, Kakashi coolly stated, his hounds beginning to growl at his side. Ah, don't be like that. It's just good business, Gato replied, seemingly finding his disapproval funny, if anything. Speaking of which, these guys may be cheap thugs, but they do cost something. So if you could take a few of them out before they kill you, I'd be much obliged. It said something about what utter scum these people were that not a single one of them had a problem with that. And clearly, their boss had to have something of a sadistic streak, as if they hadn't seen enough evidence of that already. After all, he could have just sent them here with orders to kill them. He had no reason to come out himself beyond just wanting to see them die. Walking onto a battlefield with only untrained thugs to protect you. Not smart. Naruto. Kakashi spoke quietly as he glanced at the blonde. He looked up at him, anger clear on his face, wearing his emotions on his sleeve as always. The hounds were growling, baring their teeth. I don't have much chakra left. Use the shadow clone jutsu to cover me. Naruto just nodded and Kakashi stepped forward. Well, I'm actually the one who should be thanking you, Gato. The copy ninja began to the suddenly confused gangster. He didn't bother uncovering his eye. He wouldn't need it for trash like this. I'm in a bad mood right now, and you've given me the opportunity to go on a rampage. And with that he drew two kunai and charged forward. He heard the burst of smoke that accompanied the shadow clone jutsu go off behind him, and the roars and footfalls of his hounds as they followed. Gata's confident face immediately gave way to terror, and he turned and ran into the crowd of muscle he'd hired like the coward people like him typically were. What are you waiting for? Kill them. Kakashi held his blades before his chest as he saw the various thugs ready their weapons, confident that their numbers would win the day. They were very quickly disabused of that notion. But not by Kakashi. For a moment, Kakashi's sole visible eye widened as a chain made of pale yellow energy shot past him, slamming into a vast swath of the thugs, tossing them aside like 1 Ryo coins. Many were left sprawling on the ground. Some were swept over the railings. He heard them cry out and then splash into the water below. What? But that's… Suddenly the masked boy's wounds made sense. He noted in the back of his mind as he joined the fray. The mercenaries quickly learned the difference between self-taught street fighters who didn't know the transformation technique from substitution and a veteran jonin who'd fought in wars and earned a bounty of 50 million Ryo. What followed could only be described as a massacre. He ducked under sword swiped, sidestepped spear thrusts, jumped over attempts to sweep his feet out from under him, each time striking his attacker with a kick to the head if they were lucky, a slash from his kunai if they weren't. Another spear user tried to stab him in the back. In one fluid motion, he spun on his heel, twisting just enough for the weapon to pass within an inch of his back, stabbed the poor merc in the neck, while still halfway through his turn, finishing the movement with a kick that sent the man flying into another thug and continued to push on in the direction their boss had fled in, ducking under a blow from a pair of spiked knuckles from his right and slashing the attacker across his chest as he continued. All the while the dogs howled as they fought behind him, too fast for the attackers. darting in and tearing out throats and dodging any blow thrown their way. One of the mercs noticed Pakin and tried to kick him out of the way. Big mistake. The little dog bit the man's leg and dragged him to the ground, where one of his combat hounds finished him off. Meanwhile, Naruto's clones fought with their fists. While not particularly skilled in taijutsu, any genin worth his salt would make short work of random fighters like this. One clone dodged a blow from a particularly large mercenary before another launched himself at its stomach. As he ducked forward, the wind knocked out of him. Another leaped up and punched him in the face, knocking him out cold. And that said nothing of the many that were swept aside by the chains. Close enough now. Time to end this. Charging his kunai with lightning, a far less costly technique than his raikiri, he mentally kicked himself for using that. He could have done this himself if he hadn't. Next time, he wouldn't try to be flashy. He let the weapon fly. The enhanced weapon tore through the mercenaries and their weapons, literally. Cut through them like butter, carving a trail that led straight to Gato, who let out a startled cry and took a step back as the weapon was embedded at his feet. Making a tiger's seal, Kakashi vanished in a burst of speed and reappeared at the feet of the wannabe tyrant. He had just enough time to scream before he was slashed from groin to neck with a single upward motion. He made a strangled cry as he was driven back by the force of the blow and the instinct to get away, falling over the edge of the bridge, leaving a splash and a short trail of blood. All motion slowed to a halt as the mercenaries recognized that their meal ticket had just been lost. Kakashi slowly turned to the thugs, who were not nearly as confident, to say the least. Sasuke hadn't expected to wake up. When he'd felt the pain from his injuries fade, felt his body grow numb as his consciousness began to dim, he'd been sure that was the end. So were it not for how groggy he was at the moment, he would have been very surprised as he began to regain awareness. Did he hear something, a voice? I dead. The sound was becoming clearer by the second. It was sobbing. Someone was crying his name. The voice was familiar. Wait, wasn't that Sakura? Feeling was beginning to return to him. Pain. His entire body was sore and growing worse as he became less lethargic. There was a weight on his chest, and it was only adding to the discomfort. His body was slow to respond to his command, but gradually his eye began to open and Sakura was crying over him. Could I be? Sakura, it's hard to breathe with you on top of me, he finally managed to say. With a startled sound, Sakura got up and looked to his face, shocked to see his eyes open and looking at her. After a moment, she began to cry harder and with a now relieved cry of his name wrapped her arms around his neck and began sobbing into his shoulder. That only made things worse. A sharp throbbing pain shot out from where she had pushed at the needles. Sakura, that hurts. Oh, sorry, she replied as she pulled away. His body was stiff and it felt like he was moving through water, but he managed to pull himself up to sit before shifting onto his knees, refusing to stay down when he didn't know the situation. Well, Sakura was fine. That was a relief. As was Tsunade, so clearly they hadn't lost. That was good. But where were Naruto and Kakashi? Did Naruto fare all right against their masked foe? Probably not, considering they'd been at a disadvantage even together. Stop moving, you'll only make it worse, Sakura said, trying to calm him down, but she was ignored. Is Naruto all right? And what happened to that masked kid? Naruto's fine, Sakura said, now looking uncertain. But that masked kid, he's dead. And so is Zabuza. Sasuke's eyes shot open as shock rolled through his system, instantly returning him to full awareness. Dead? How? Did Naruto do it? I think so, Sakura answered. He came to us after Kakashi defeated Zabuza. By the time we got here, it was over already. At that, Sasuke began to wildly look around, taking in his surroundings. There was Naruto and a few of his clones, standing on one side of a horde of what seemed to be street thugs with a few of them mixed in. Where did they come from? There was a path carved through them, at the end of which stood Kakashi. Sasuke quickly assumed he'd gone for their leader, considering that the fighting appeared to have stopped. He took in the damage to the bridge, the now clear air free of the mist, and then laid eyes on the masked boy. Half his face exposed and deep stab wounds in his chest, his shirt stained in a red that pooled around his body. But how? After giving him a moment to process, Sakura smiled at him, clasping her hands together in front of her. You're amazing though, Sasuke. I knew you'd pull through. You must have protected your vital spots even as you were going down. No, Sasuke denied as he quickly put the pieces together. It was him. He did the same thing to me he did to Zabuza from the very start. Naruto. Sakura called out, and Sasuke turned his gaze back to the blonde. Look, Sasuke's okay. He could see Naruto tearing up from here. He gave him a silent wave. What do we do? One of the thugs asked the others. These guys just killed our meal ticket. Another snarled. I don't want to mess with these shinobi. I say we cut out losses and get the hell out of here. What are you talking about? Most of them are kids. It was then that an arrow fell at the front of the horde. That drew everyone's attention to the opposite side of the bridge. The shinobi's eyes widened. The thugs' collective jaws dropped. Every villager from Wave was standing together, armed with whatever they could find to use as weapons. Shovels, axes, pickaxes, hoes, rakes. They brandished their makeshift weapons with looks of determination. And leading them was Inari, armed with a crossbow. Don't even think about it, or you'll have all of us to deal with. One of the men shouted and was met with a chorus of agreement and battle cries from his fellow villagers. Inari, Naruto shouted. Hey, a hero shows up at the last second, right? Inari answered with a smile. Ah, he must have said something that got through to the kid. Credit where it was due. That was nicely done on Naruto's part. So guys, Kakashi said, and all the thugs shivered as they turned to the copy ninja. After a pause, he gave them one of those eye smiles of his. Run. And they obeyed. And thus, the land of waves was saved. But Sasuke didn't feel much of a sense of accomplishment in it. Oh, he was happy for the people of Wave. You'd have to be heartless not to be. After who knows how many years of misery, they finally had a brighter future ahead of them. Some part of him felt proud about playing a part in that. But it was overshadowed by the part that was frustrated by the fact that Naruto, the dead last, beat someone he couldn't. It was another reminder of the wall that lies in front of him, of how far he had to go to achieve his ambition. Naruto smiled as he watched the people of Wave let out a cheer while the mercs practically fell over themselves trying to get away. Though anyone who knew him would know right away his reaction was far more subdued than was normal for him. Normally, he'd be right there with them, but now that the danger had passed, his mind went back to the masked boy. His eyes turned back to the body lying there in the middle of the bridge. He flinched as he remembered coming to his senses and realizing what he'd done. And it was worse now. He'd never actually meant to kill them. He'd probably been planning to fool Zabuza with that trick so that he wouldn't, and he'd died for it himself. Why'd it turn out that way? Why would someone like that devote himself to someone like Zabuza? He knew why. He didn't know the boy's circumstances, but he knew what it was like to be completely alone, to just want someone, anyone, to acknowledge him, and Zabuza had. And for that, he'd do anything for him. He knew because he felt the same. For Old Man Hokage, for Irika, and for his team. He winced as he realized he didn't even know the boy's name. Chances are the only one who had was Zabuza. That felt wrong. He may have been an enemy, but he was a good guy. He was kind-hearted, and he fought out of love for his master. They probably could have been friends if things had been different. He deserved to be remembered, and they didn't even have a name to put to his face. He felt a hand on his shoulder and looked up to see his sensei standing there. After a moment, he made a gesture toward the land of waves with his head. Come on, we need to talk. They walked over to Sasuke and Sakura, and he gestured for them to follow. And so Team 7 walked back across the bridge. Inari noticed and started to call out, but Tsunade put a hand on his shoulder, having guessed what was up. They silently made their way back to the land and off the beaten path into the forest. He led them away from prying eyes until he found a fallen tree. Kakashi took in their surroundings and nodded to himself. He then turned back to his team, his only visible eye wandering over them. Sasuke looked like his usual aloof self. Naruto noticed Sakura was looking his way with concern. Sit. Now. They obeyed, sitting down on the floor while he took a seat on the tree. He sighed. All right, I'm sure you all know what we're going to start with, he said before focusing on the blonde. Naruto, what you're feeling right now is normal. Taking a life for the first time is never an easy thing, but it's a reality of life as a shinobi. He looked over to Sakura and Sasuke. But then, She probably needed to hear this more than him. Make no mistake, you two will go through the same eventually. Sakura flinched. Sasuke didn't react, like always. Does it get easier? Naruto asked. Do you see me letting what I did back on the bridge get to me? Kakashi replied, and that answered that question. The man sighed, closing his eyes. My first kill was when the world was nearing the Third Shinobi World War. Tensions were high, missions a lot more dangerous. We needed bodies in the field, and we couldn't afford to slowly introduce Jin into things the way we can in times of relative peace. I had to pick myself up immediately, or I wouldn't be here now. It does get easier. There'll come a time when killing those you know are scum won't even faze you. The important things are being able to recognize when it's necessary. Every shinobi has their own opinion on that. That and how far we stick to the tenets of being tools versus our nature as humans. That and making sure you never take any sort of pleasure in it. Zabuza was far from the worst example of what those who do become. Naruto's expression twisted at that, a reaction mirrored by Sakura beside him. Sasuke's only slightly narrowed his eyes in response. Kakashi let all that sink in before he continued. That said, killing someone like that boy should never be easy. He looked at Naruto once again. I imagine you only felt worse when you realized that Sasuke was still alive. The blonde flinched, and that was all the answer his team needed. Take however long you need to come to terms with what happened. I'm here to talk if you need it, and I'm sure your teammates won't shy away if you feel the need to lean on them. There was a pause before Sakura spoke up. Naruto, it's okay. She started, struggling to find what to say. Even if he was faking, you thought he'd killed Sasuke. You couldn't have known otherwise. I'd have done the same thing. She then slumped forward. I mean, if I could, and I managed to stop crying. Sakura. There was a moment of silence before Sasuke broke it. How? He began, drawing their attention back to him. He was giving Naruto a hard look, frustration clear in his expression. How exactly did you beat that guy? Naruto grimaced before looking back to the ground. Sakura looking back and forth between her teammates, wanting to say something, but not sure what. I'm not really sure what happened. He admitted. When I thought he killed you, I just wanted him to pay. His fists clenched, saying the last word through gritted teeth. Then, these chains burst from me and broke all the mirrors. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. Chains. Huh, what are you talking about? Sakura asked. Of course. He used them against the thugs too, but you wouldn't have noticed. Sasuke was still out cold and Sakura was preoccupied. Kakashi spoke up. If you could demonstrate? Naruto made an uncertain sound. Now that the battle was over, thinking of those chains reminded him of. Well, not like he could just stop using them, right? He needed to get stronger. Strong enough that he'd never have to go through watching a teammate die again. Or at least say he did all he could to avoid that. This whole thing proved that to him. Closing his eyes, he called upon that power once again. After the first time he called on them back on the bridge, it was like something had just snapped into place. He just knew how to summon them forth. A pale yellow chain grew from his back, looping over his shoulder, flying forward and burying its pointed tip in the ground. What the hell? Sakura cried in shock, while Sasuke looked on with interest. Naruto looked up at his sensei. Do you know anything about these things, Kakashi-sensei? Indeed I do, Kakashi replied with a nod. While not officially the case, I suppose you could call this the Uzumaki clan's Kekkai Genkai. What? There's an Uzumaki clan? Naruto exclaimed in shock. Why was this the first he was hearing about this? Why was he by himself if he had a... Wait, had they been destroyed? Like Sasuke's clan? Was that why he'd never even heard of them around Konoha? Or did they reject him because of the Kyuubi? Naruto's from a clan? Sakura seemed just as shocked as he did. Even Sasuke seemed mildly surprised. Naruto has a Kekkai Genkai? Why? Wait, what's a Kekkai Genkai? Naruto asked. Seriously? Sakura commented with a frown. Kakashi sighed. I see we have more than just your skills to polish up. Luckily, I have an idea about that, but that's for later. A Kekkai Genkai is, well, the name says it all really. It's a unique ability tied to a certain bloodline, like the Sharingan, or likely that boy's ice jutsu. They're usually far more powerful most than standard techniques. Those chains aren't technically considered Kekkai Genkai, probably because some other techniques produce similar effects, but they mostly fit the bill. They're superior to the other chakra chain techniques I know of and instinctual for those of the clan lucky enough to have the potential for them. Naruto's nodded rapidly, a determined look on his face. But then, he looked vaguely uncertain. Kakashi-sensei, he began. If you know that much about them, do you know anyone who has them? The blonde asked hopefully. Kakashi closed his eye and took a deep breath. I did. He then met Naruto's gaze. Your mother, Kushina Uzumaki. Naruto stared in disbelief, absently noting Sakura looking back and forth between him and their sensei beside him. Part of him was elated to finally hear about his parents. But part of him was screaming, why hadn't Kakashi mentioned that before? Sensing what the blonde was about to say, Kakashi raised his hand in a stop gesture. I know what you're going to ask, but please understand. I downplayed things during the bell test when I told you my best friend's name was written on that memorial. Of all the people I've held dear to me, only one has survived through the years. And whatever irritation Naruto felt at Kakashi for waiting this long to tell him that he knew his mother withered away, he and Sakura looked at the man in understanding. Sasuke simply looked down solemnly, and Naruto got the feeling he sympathized. Talking about the past is painful for me. Don't expect me to bring it up unless I have a point to make. There was silence for a few moments before Naruto finally couldn't help himself. What was she like? He asked, far more subdued than usual. Well, from what I know, she was a lot like you in her childhood. Naruto's eyes widened at that. Kakashi crossed his arms and looked to the sky. But I only have secondhand knowledge on that front. When I knew her, she was almost always cheerful and kind, courageous, though she did have a bit of a temper. There was a fond look in his eyes students had never seen before as he thought back on happier times. She was known as a great beauty throughout the village. She had long red hair, a characteristic of the Uzumaki clan. He tilted his head to the side as he looked at the blonde. You may not have gotten the clan's look from her, but you have her eyes. Naruto's eyes grew misty. He sniffled a bit, but there was a genuine smile on his face as he tried to imagine the woman his sensei was describing. He paused for a moment before glancing at Sasuke. She was actually close friends with Sasuke's mother, Mikoto. Naruto blinked in shock, turning watery eyes towards the Uchiha, who had mirrored the action. They had hoped you two would be as good friends as they were, from what Mikoto told me. You may not remember it. You were too young, but things were pretty hectic in the wake of the Kyuubi attack for the Uchiha clan, and things only went downhill as the years passed. It kept her from seeing you, but that wasn't the case in the earlier days. I ran into her a few times, checking up on you when you were a baby. There was silence for a moment as Naruto thought of all he'd learned about his mother. It was eventually broken by Sakura, whose eyes darted back to Naruto a few times as she realized something. You, Kakashi-sensei, from what you just said, did she? The white-haired man made a brief sound of agreement. She died in the Kyuubi attack. Naruto flinched at those words. She was badly wounded near the start, but a testament to how powerful those chains are once fully mastered. She was able to restrain the Kyuubi during the final moments of the battle. Naruto stared at Kakashi wide-eyed, astonished at the idea that she could hold it down after all that he'd heard of the Kyuubi's power, from what he felt in the little sliver he'd accessed not too long ago. Their final form has the power to seal the chakra of anything they ensnare, you see. Combine that with their durability, and there isn't much that can escape them. My mom was pretty amazing, huh? Naruto choked up a little as the words left him. She was. That night, after all the festivities ceased and everyone went to bed, Sakura found herself staring at the ceiling with her mind in turmoil. Useless. She'd been useless on that bridge. Guarding Tsunade? Who was she kidding? She wouldn't have lasted 2 seconds against Zabuza or that masked boy. Even before that, Naruto and Sasuke had managed to work together to free Kakashi during their first round against the rogue ninja. And what had she done? Nothing. Zip. They were supposed to be a team. They were meant to have each other's back and stand together. But it all fell on those two and their sensei. And look at what happened. Sasuke almost died, and Naruto had been hurt. Not physically, but it was clear that he was still reeling from killing their opponent. Her parents had warned her of that. One of the few times they'd really talked about life as a shinobi, of how hard it would hit you despite all the academy did to prepare you for it. Thinking of Naruto reminded her of all their interactions up until this point, and she couldn't help but cringe. Sure, the blonde was annoying and he could be an idiot at times, but enough so to justify how often she'd berated or hit him. No, not even close. She remembered what her sensei had told her, did the math, and realized he must have been around their age during the last war. That had brought her to a realization. Out of her whole team, she was the only one to have had a happy and relatively stable childhood. Naruto hadn't had parents to teach him, to welcome him back and offer advice and encouragement, who would be able to support him through what he was feeling now. She remembered the look on his face as Kakashi had described his mother. How could she have been so flippant about that? How could she not have realized how much growing up alone like that must hurt? She grimaced as she recalled her words to Sasuke way back before the bell test, when she said how lucky he was to not have parents, that was why he could be so selfish. The only saving grace she could see was that she hadn't been stupid enough to say that to his face. Wait. Her eyes shot open as she sat up, quick as a blur. Oh God, she'd said that to Sasuke. The Uchiha incident. She'd thoughtlessly said that to someone who'd seen his entire family murdered. She fell back onto the bed and stared dully at the ceiling. No wonder he'd been so mad at her that day. She was a horrible person, wasn't she? Team 7 was silent as they neared the village gates. After the bridge had been completed, the entire village had come out to see them off. After a tearful goodbye between Naruto and Inari, they'd been on their way. They walked forward with their heads held high, knowing the nation had a chance for a brighter future now, thanks to them, for the most part. Naruto had mostly returned to his usual self over the few weeks it had taken them to finish the bridge. A bit quieter. There were still times when dreams of the masked boy interrupted his sleep. But with time and the support of his sensei, and occasionally Sakura, he had taken great strides to move on. He'd run through the events on the bridge many a time in his head, wondering if things could have gone differently. His sensei's words and Sakura's reassurances had helped, but he still couldn't help but wonder how things would have turned out if he hadn't walked into that dome of ice mirrors. If maybe he'd tried to take the masked boy out of the fight with that first unseen blow. But then, how would he have reacted if he'd lived? Zabuza wouldn't have stopped. Unless Gato decided to show himself before they killed him, they would have been forced into a battle to the death. When he thought about how he felt when he'd believed that Sasuke died, he had to wonder how would the masked boy have reacted if they'd killed Zabuza while he was still alive. He liked to think things would have worked out, but there were a lot of ways things could have gone wrong. There was something else Kakashi had told him since that day, cliché as it sounds. There's no point dwelling on what-ifs. And that was true. Thinking about all the ways it could have gone differently wouldn't change that the masked boy was dead, buried back there in Wave. Kakashi had sealed Zabuza's body into a scroll. Apparently, that was the normal thing to do with rogue ninja. They tended to have pretty big bounties on their heads, which made sense between betraying their village and whatever crimes they committed to make a living afterward. Though Kakashi had mentioned that any shinobi who made a name for themselves would probably wind up with a bounty too. That was kinda cool. It was like a measure of your awesomeness. Not really worth it though, when it came with people looking to cash in. Sakura meanwhile had been quiet, and she wouldn't talk about why. She kept to herself, throwing glances to him and Sasuke every once in a while, and seemed unsure of herself. It sucked, seeing the usually confident girl like that, but she just wouldn't open up, not to him or Kakashi. She'd say something supportive to her fellow genin every once in a while, but that was that. She hadn't even fawned over Sasuke since that day on the bridge. He'd had to check to see if the sky was falling when he realized that. And Sasuke, well, Sasuke had been himself, the textbook example of brooding. The three genin couldn't help but feel somewhat relieved home was in sight. But Naruto noticed Kakashi didn't seem as relaxed. While he mostly seemed his usual cool self, he hadn't once taken out that stupid book of his, and he noticed the man's eye was slightly tense. As they approached the gates, the guard looked up and greeted them. "Hey, welcome back." He frowned, his face twisting slightly as he took in the genin. "Tough mission. It wasn't a failure, was it?" "Oh no, nothing like that," Kakashi replied before rubbing the back of his head and looking away. "It's a long story. Let's just say Lord Hokage is going to rake me over the coals and leave it at that." That got Naruto's attention. Why would the old man be mad? They managed, hadn't they? Not exactly the way he'd have wanted, but they pulled it off. He'd have to be impressed that they saved a nation, right? Ouch, The guard gave him a look of sympathy. Well, best not put it off. And with that, they all entered the village and made their way down the road to the administration building. They walked up the familiar corridors and soon found themselves at the Hokage's office. They knocked on the door to the office and got the okay to enter. "Ah, welcome back, Team 7. Hiruzen greeted from his desk with a nod as the four walked in, a hand on his pipe. He frowned slightly when he took in the three genin. Naruto didn't have his usual smile. He couldn't grin as he usually could, knowing what they'd be discussing, and his eyes were open. Beside him, he noticed Sakura was looking as sullen as she always had for the past few weeks. "I take it there were complications?" "That's one way to put it." Kakashi began with a sigh. He then looked to the Hokage, slightly tense as if he was expecting a blow. "There were some things the client kept from us, and some unexpected developments. Had we known everything, the mission would have been classified as A rank in difficulty." "Was this revealed to you early on, or once you reached the land of waves?" Hiruzen frowned deeply. "Early on." Hiruzen's eyes hardened as he stared at Kakashi. "And am I to understand that you continued the mission anyway?" "That's correct, Lord Hokage." He set his pipe down and leaned forward, clasping his hands before him. "I'm going to need a full explanation." And so Team 7 gave him a full report on everything that happened. The third Hokage was silent for most of the explanation, occasionally asking for clarification on some details, but otherwise simply listened. When it was over, he clasped his hands before him and closed his eyes as he contemplated all that he had just heard. Finally, he looked up. "I'm going to ask that you all remain silent until I'm finished speaking." The third god of shinobi began. He looked to the genin with approval. "First, let me commend the three of you for the success of this mission. Despite facing danger far beyond what you had any right to be prepared for at this point in your career, you pushed on for the sake of the client and his people. In doing so, you saved an impoverished nation from a dark fate and granted them new hope. Not only that, but you rekindled the wills of its downtrodden people. For this, you should be proud, as I am to call you shinobi of this village." Naruto smiled widely at those words, just as the blonde always had. Sasuke has a small smirk, which was about the most one could get from him. Sakura's expression, on the other hand, hadn't changed. Then the Hokage's face hardened once again as his gaze turned towards their sensei. However, Kakashi met his eyes unflinchingly. "It should never have come down to you in the first place." The genin were clearly surprised, but Hiruzen kept going. "Kakashi, it is your job as their jonin leader to not only protect and guide them, but to recognize when they're in over their heads and pull them back. You should have returned to the village the moment it became clear that this mission was beyond your students' current capabilities, regardless of their feelings on the matter, at least when they're still this early in their careers. If you had already reached wave by the time you became aware of the true scope of the mission, if it was too late to turn back without condemning their nation, that would be one thing. While Tsunade's reasoning is understandable, given the circumstances, I would not have been against working out a long-term payment plan or agreeing to later reimbursement. And then we could have sent a proper escort with him." Naruto and Sakura's jaws dropped while Sasuke frowned. They hadn't even thought of that. Then again, his teammates had probably been as happy to take a mission that wasn't painting fences or tending lawns as he was. And who knows how things would have turned out if anyone else had gone. Kakashi was a pretty big deal among jonin, wasn't he? What if whoever they sent instead wasn't a match for Zabuza? No, besides what happened with the ice user, Naruto couldn't say he had any regrets about taking the mission. Still, he could see the Hokage's point. The third Hokage's eyes narrowed. Need I point out that had this ice wielder been more like his master, or if Zabuza had more Chunin-level ninja at his disposal, then this would have ended in disaster? Kakashi closed his eye. "No, I trusted my students, but I understood the danger after my first battle with Zabuza." Hiruzen closed his eyes and sat for a moment in silent thought. When he opened them once more, he stared at Kakashi. "I won't punish you beyond this reprimand, but understand that you are on thin ice. The facts that, first and foremost, your genin have returned unharmed. The mission was a success, and that prior to your encounter with Zabuza after reaching the land of waves the mission appeared to be Barank are somewhat mitigating factors. Nevertheless, I don't want to see this again until your students are ready for it." "Understood," Kakashi answered with a nod. The Hokage sighed and sat back in his chair, picking up his pipe and taking a deep breath before blowing out a cloud of smoke. He then looked to the blonde. Naruto, you have been made aware of the origins of those chains? Yeah, Kakashi-sensei told me. Then, the blonde frowned and raised a fist. Hey, why did no one tell me I came from a clan before? Well, I'm glad to see you're still high-spirited. The third noted before closing his eyes. The Uzumaki clan is a sore subject for Konoha. You see, the Uzumaki clan were actually distant relatives of one of the founding clans of this village, the Senju clan. That got exclamations of shock from Naruto and Sakura, while even Sasuke seemed surprised to hear that. The blonde stepped closer, eager to hear more. The Uzumaki were a powerful clan, one that retained strong relations with their cousins the Senju. They ultimately formed their own village, Uzushiogakure, our staunchest allies. They were known for their mastery of the art of sealing jutsu, and also for the longevity that those of the village, especially the Uzumaki, possessed. Indeed, they were the greatest masters of sealing jutsu in all the continent, and that made their village strong despite its small size. Naruto excitedly ate up all the information given to him. His hands were clenched into fists before him in eagerness as he listened to how amazing his family was. And his clan was related to the Senju. He might not have paid a lot of attention in class, not to mention how often he was put out of the room for whatever reason they could think of before Irika came and warmed up to him. But even he knew they were known as the strongest clan there was. And it meant he was related to the first and second Hokages. Distantly, but still. Awesome. But it was here that the story took a dark turn, and the Hokage solemnly closed his eyes. But their power made them a potential threat to many, more so thanks to their close alliance with us. During a previous war, while we were preoccupied facing our own enemies, Kumo and Iwa launched a surprise attack on Uzushio. His gaze turned to the ceiling, appearing lost in memories. Attacking seal masters on their own ground are usually folly. Uzushio's forces gave better than they got, but in the end, there were just too many. The village was destroyed, and the few survivors of its leading clans scattered to the winds. You'll find them every once in a while, here and there. He looked back to the genin, taking in the dejected look on Naruto's face. The fact that we failed to protect such treasured friends, the blood of one of our founding clans, is held as a dark mark on the history of our village. And Naruto quickly deflated upon hearing the fate of his clan. Sakura looked at him in sympathy, while Sasuke gazed in thought of what he'd learned. After a few moments of silence, he asked, So, there are still other Uzumaki out there? And how did my mom come to our village if she was from Uzushio? The third Hokage shook his head. I'm sorry, Naruto. It's unlikely you will encounter any others of your clan. We have not heard of any other Uzumaki in a long time. One of my students told me of one he found during the Second Shinobi World War, but he chose to remain where Jiraiya found him, and we have since had word of his death. As for your mother, she was transferred to our village as part of an agreement shortly before Uzushio's destruction. After a pause to let that reality sink in, Hiruzen picked up his account of the fallen clan. While we may not speak of the village or the clan for the shame associated with our failure, there are still signs of the solidarity we once had with them. The red spiral, I'm sure you've noticed on the back of our flak jackets, and even some of our other attire like your own jacket, is the symbol of the clan and Uzushio. Naruto's eyes widened. The symbol of his family had been staring at him in the face for all these years. The Uzumaki did not give their village their symbol out of vanity, mind you. It was because it rested on a small island off the western coast of the Land of Fire, the Land of Whirlpools, which fell along with the village. As the name suggests, the nation was surrounded by whirlpools, an effective natural defense, though not effective enough to save them. What better symbol to represent such a location than a spiral? There was silence as Naruto thought about all that he'd heard. Gramps, you and Kakashi-sensei have told me a lot about my mom and her clan, but what about my dad? And there was the question Hiruzen had known was coming, one that he had long debated on giving him an answer for. Not if, mind you, but when. Naruto would need to know, sooner or later, about his legacy and about what the Hokage suspected lied in his future. His father had left him with great burdens that no one as young as Naruto should have to bear. But that was how the shinobi world worked. It was far better now than it was before the villages were formed, a dark time he was glad to have only heard about. But even now, all too often young shinobi were forced to carry a weight a child never should. But whether he knew about them or not, they were his burdens to carry. And knowing where he came from, of his parents' legacy and feelings, may spur Naruto on to reach his full potential. He had never told Naruto before because it wasn't information he could allow getting out. There was always the risk of spies, and his father had many enemies. He couldn't risk him blurting the secret out, as children were wont to do, especially with as grand a secret as this. But he was a shinobi now. Truly, if still early in his career. If he couldn't keep his own secrets. Hiruzen closed his eyes and contemplated for a few moments before looking at them once more. Let's move on for now. Already expecting the blonde to speak up, the third cut him off before he had the chance. Naruto, stay afterward. It's past time I told you what you wanted to know. He then spoke to Sasuke and Sakura. This will be a private discussion, so I want you two to go home once we've concluded our business. But, Sakura started to say, only to stop when Kakashi put his hand on her shoulder and shook his head. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. No doubt the Uchiha had already deduced why he wanted them out of the room. He regarded the blonde curiously for a moment before he shrugged and looked away. Hiruzen had no visible reaction as the Uchiha's wandering eyes landed on the pictures of the 4 Hokage hanging from his wall. A rare expression of pure shock lit up the Uchiha's face. Hiruzen watched him choke on his breath slightly as his gaze shot back to the back of Naruto's head. The boy quickly schooled himself, however. Honestly, he was surprised that so many people who gave the boy a hard time didn't suspect given Naruto's looks. Perhaps it was people's prejudice due to the Kyuubi, but he couldn't help but mentally sigh whenever a ninja who'd known his father failed to make the connection. There weren't that many people in the village with peach skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes. And he just happened to seal the Kyuubi into a babe that shared those traits with him? That wasn't even looking underneath the underneath. And of those who did realize and did nothing, well, the less said the better. At least his successor's last remaining student had his reasons. Now, if I'm not mistaken, you recovered Zabuza's body? Hiruzen questioned, receiving a nod from Kakashi in turn, who walked to the table and placed 2 scrolls before the Hokage. The one on the left is Zabuza's weapon, the Kubikurabocho. Hiruzen nodded. That had potential. The blades of the 7 swordsmen of the mist were extremely valuable. Perhaps they could use it at some point to help broker an alliance with Kiri? They would certainly appreciate it. Once we've processed the body and turned it in, you will of course receive your compensation. Unfortunately, for the danger they faced, they would only receive the reward of a C-rank mission, as that was what it had been categorized as. As soon as they had been paid and their business was concluded, Hiruzen dismissed the rest of Team 7, and Naruto stood before him. With a gesture, he ordered the hidden Umbu that kept watch over the office at all times to leave them for a moment. Not that Naruto noticed, leaving them truly alone. The boy was nervous. As anxious as he no doubt was to finally find out who his father was, he was sure he could tell that what they were about to discuss was a heavy subject. The Hokage stood and turned away. He clasped his hands behind his back as he gazed out of the window at the village and remembered that terrible night 13 years ago when their village lost so much. When Naruto lost his parents. The things I'm about to tell you are all secrets of the highest order. They are not to be repeated under any circumstances. Not even to Kakashi, though he is aware of some of what I have to say. If word of this spread, you may find yourself a target of foes you cannot hope to stand against. Am I clear? He turned back to Naruto, who seemed to recognize how serious this was. The blonde nodded, which he returned. Very well. He walked around his desk, coming to a stop in front of the blonde, and kneeled down so that he was at eye level with the genin. Naruto, your father's name was Minato Namikaze. Naruto's mind went blank. He stood frozen as he stared at his leader, his eyes wide and his mouth agape. All sounds seemed to have vanished as the words of the Hokage echoed in his head. Your father's name was Minato Namikaze. The 4th Hokage. The hero he'd always looked up to. The man who'd sealed the Kyuubi inside of him. The old man made a gesture his head and looked to the far wall. Naruto followed his gaze, and it landed on a picture he'd seen before. One that he'd looked at many of the times he'd been brought to this office for something he'd done, and more recently on official business as a ninja, to a picture of a man with a kind smile, with focused, intelligent blue eyes, eyes that looked so different than his. But then Kakashi told him he'd gotten them from his mother, right? And while they may be shaped differently, they were the same shade of blue, with spiky blonde hair and peach-colored skin, so much like what he'd see looking into the mirror every day. The very idea had just seemed so impossible that it never clicked before. He choked from the emotion welling up inside of him. His body started to tremble, his hands clenched into fists as his eyes clenched shut. "I know," the old man spoke softly. "I can't imagine how you must be feeling, but I know it must be overwhelming. I've wanted to tell you, since the first time you asked me. But can you look me in the eye and tell me that you wouldn't have shouted this from the rooftops if I told you back then?" Naruto was having trouble breathing, but those words got through to him. He wouldn't be able to say that. Your father had many enemies. Enemies that may have sought vengeance upon his son had they learned you existed. That is why I couldn't tell you, but you are a shinobi now. Keeping secrets is a part of this life. Why? Naruto's breath hitched as he spoke. Why did he know what I was going to go through? I'm sure he did, Hiruzen said, closing his eyes. Then how could he do this? Naruto roared, in rage, sorrow, and pain. So many emotions flying through him. For many reasons. One was simply this. Hiruzen looked him in the eye. Because as Hokage, he couldn't ask another to carry a burden, to make a sacrifice that he was not willing to. To be Hokage means to protect all in this village, to serve as a pillar of support for everyone, and mark the road for its people to follow. And also, knowing the man, I believe it was because he felt there was no one he could trust more to use that power for the best in you, rather than succumbing to it or resentment, than his own son. Because he believed in you. Tears began to flow from Naruto's eyes. He buried his face in his sleeve and wiped them away. So many conflicting thoughts filled his mind. He didn't know what to think of the fourth, his father. Part of him wanted to blame him for all that he had been through. Another part understood what the old man was saying. And another felt his heart swell at the idea that his father had faith in him. If he could meet the man now, he'd probably punch him in the gut, then hug him and not let go. He heard the Hokage rise to his feet and looked up to see him a few feet away with his back to him. There is more, Hiruzen said, and Naruto could only do his best to ready himself after that revelation, even as his eyes still shimmered. First, there are things you need to know. Things that are common knowledge in most villages, but were kept from the recent generation here in Konoha in the hope that you would not be treated differently by your peers. The Kyuubi was not the only one of its kind. The blonde couldn't help but take in a soft gasp at that. It is the strongest of 9 beasts, entities of pure chakra made flesh known as the Biju. The Biju are immortal. Should they be killed, their chakra will merely disperse and eventually reform. For that reason, and in some cases to harness their power, the 9 are sealed into humans. Humans that exhibit immense reserves of chakra and often some of the beast's powers as a result. People like you are known as Jinchuriki. Jinchuriki? Naruto echoed the term. Hiruzen turned to him with a nod. Jinchuriki are by some regarded as their village's secret and greatest weapons. It is a lifelong status, for you see, if the Biju is removed from its container, the Jinchuriki will die. It is important you know that, for you see, your mother was the Kyuubi's previous Jinchuriki. What? But then she must have known what he would go through. But wait, that didn't make sense with what he'd been told about her before. But Naruto struggled, so much going on in his head at the moment. Kakashi told me she held the Kyuubi down for my dad to seal it. So how could she have? The third Hokage nodded. The vitality of the Uzumaki is an amazing thing. Strong enough even to allow a Jinchuriki to survive being separated from their Biju, but while they may initially survive, the damage is mortal. Your mother lived past the beast's removal, but she was not long for this world. He then looked to the blonde in sympathy, walking forward and placing a hand on his shoulder. I understand that this is a lot to take in. Your father placed a heavy burden on your shoulders. But know this, I can tell you from having known them as well as I did. Your father loved your mother with all his heart. He did not care about the beast sealed within her, and it would not have affected how he would have looked at you. He allowed a moment of silence at a sniffle from Naruto. And as for your mother, she would not have allowed your father to seal the Kyuubi within you without good reason. though I can only speculate as to what that reason is. But that is a discussion for another time. How did the Kyuubi escape? Hiruzen breathed deeply. When a female Jinchuriki becomes pregnant, part of the chakra that would normally maintain the seal instead nurtures the child. And during birth, it's at its absolute weakest. That said, the seal can fairly easily be maintained by a master of the sealing arts. Minato had been trained by Kushina herself. He rivaled the Uzumaki's vaunted skill in the field, so it should have been well within his abilities to keep the Kyuubi from breaking free. As for how it happened, as I said, I can only speculate. There was silence as Naruto thought of all he'd learned before he asked a single question. What were they like? Both of them. How did they meet? And what can you tell me about my clan? Hiruzen smiled, clearly happy to tell him. Wearing the same brooding or cool as his Sakura and his former classmates would put it, expression he usually wore, Sasuke made his way up the stairs to his home. Well, where he lived anyway. It didn't feel like home. He hadn't felt at home since that night all those years ago, where he lost everything. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, taking his shoes off in the entranceway, and began to walk towards the small kitchen area. He stopped for a brief moment and looked out the window. There was a reason he chose this place when looking for an apartment. He could just barely see it from here. The district that his clan once called home, rows upon rows of empty houses, shops where his clansmen would sell weapons or prepare meals and snacks with closely guarded recipes. They had been a small village unto themselves, within Konoha. His family had once been that large, and it had been empty for nearly a decade. Tearing his eyes away, he continued his journey, reaching the kitchen and pulling out the ingredients to make onigiri. He was still more than a little irritated by Naruto's victory over the ice user. He didn't envy Naruto for having killed their opponent, not that he blamed him either. Much as he might not like the blonde, he would have felt the same if he hadn't made it in time and thought the masked boy had killed him. The revelations since then had been rather shocking. So, the dead last was the survivor of a once great clan, like himself, and the son of the fourth Hokage no less. It hadn't been hard to put the pieces together on that once he realized the only reason to keep quiet about his father's identity was if he had enemies. But he was still trying to wrap around it. Specifically, the fact that no one had noticed. Or at least no one noticed and said or did anything. He was observant enough to have noted that a lot of the blonde's behavior was the result of how he was treated, not the other way around. Once he knew that his parents' identity was a secret, it had seemed so obvious. There weren't that many big names that had anything in common with Naruto. All shinobi who had served under the man or worked alongside him. And no one even suspected? You'd think at least a few people who knew his father well would have reached out to him when he was treated like a pariah. And why was he treated like that anyway? Yeah, there was something fishy there, but he didn't have enough information to figure out what. He finished cooking and sat down at his table, silently eating the meal. He rarely wasted his time with the television, despite the decent one sitting against the wall at the side of his bed. Well, the blonde's heritage hardly mattered to him. That was something he'd admit he had in common with Naruto. You had to earn respect yourself. Unless he started showing the talents his clan or his father was known for, it wouldn't change his view of him. Interesting to know, but that was about it. After finishing his meal, and then the cleanup after, he went to his room to prepare for a shower. As he did, he spied the only real personal effect in the house. The picture Team 7 took on the day they officially became a team. Kakashi smiling as he ruffled his and Naruto's hair, Naruto glaring at him, and Sakura smiling at the front. He thought of what his sensei had told them after the final battle in Wave and briefly thought of his mother. That their mothers had been friends and had wanted them to be in turn. That he didn't know what to think about. Sakura had spent most of her time in her room since she got home. A brief detour to the kitchen to pick up a snack, a lackluster greeting to her parents, a shower, and then straight to bed where she stared at the ceiling. And there she remained, her thoughts a jumbled mess of self-depreciation. In doing so, you saved an impoverished nation from a dark fate and granted them new hope. The words of Lord Third ran through her mind. Not only that, but you rekindled the wills of its downtrodden people. For this, you should be proud, as I am to call you shinobi of this village. But I didn't do anything, she thought. It was all Sasuke and Naruto. I can't even say I guarded Tsunade. The one time he needed protecting it was from Zabuza. I may as well not have even been there. What had she been thinking back in the academy? Doing the absolute minimum of training so she could focus on her looks? Relying on academics to get her through in a profession where life and death battles were normal? She couldn't remember if she'd ever considered that that would mean her teammates would have to carry her, that she would weigh them down when a screw-up could get them all killed. Stupid. So stupid. And she hadn't been a good teammate to them, had she? She'd put Naruto down at every opportunity. Sure, he was annoying, but still, and Sasuke. All she wanted right now was for him to smile at her, for him to feel as strongly for her as she had for him. But why would he? She'd let him know how she felt every chance she got, but had she ever helped or been there for him? Hell, she hadn't even considered that he was an orphan. She'd never done anything but fawned over him continuously. Isn't that more or less what Naruto did with her sometimes? Did he find that as annoying as she did? Suddenly, she wasn't so annoyed at Naruto's crush. Not because she had all returned it, mind you, but because she was suddenly wondering why anyone would feel that way about her with how she acted. There was a knock on the door. "Sakura, are you okay?" Her mother's voice came through. "I'm fine, Mom," Sakura answered/lied back. It must have been clear in her voice because her mother cracked open the door. Green eyes a darker shade than her own peeked into the room, a look of concern on her face. Her mother stood just short of 5 feet 7 inches and had short, straight blonde hair that ended in a flare at her shoulders. She wore more or less a white version of Sakura's cheapao dress and white sandals. She looked fit, as most kunoichi did, although she had long since stopped taking missions and more or less taken on civilian life, as her husband had. No surprise there. Sakura was grateful for that because her parents, they weren't very good ninja. Not that that wasn't the leaf calling the grass green. Case in point, neither had ever even made chunin. Her mother stepped into the room, looked at her daughter, and sighed. "Yeah, I'm not buying it." She walked over and sat down on the bed. "Sakura, you've been blue ever since you got home. Don't try to tell me you haven't. Something happened on that mission. What was it?" "It's nothing," Sakura denied, rolling to her side away from her mother. "Leave me alone." "Oh dear, I was afraid this day would come," Mabuki said, putting a hand to her face and shaking her head. "Sakura, you're becoming a teenager." Her daughter just scoffed. The woman looked to the ceiling sadly. "Whatever happened to the little girl who would tell me everything when she got home? It seems like just yesterday I was holding you while you were crying about the other kids poking fun at that cute forehead of yours. Or you told me about how happy you were that you finally made a friend. Or, I get it, Mom." "Ah, see, that's more like it." Mabuki smiled at needling a reaction from her daughter. She placed a hand on her arm. "Now look, I was a child once too. And I may not have gone very far, but I am a kunoichi. I know how hard the shinobi life can hit you when you're just starting out. So tell me what happened." A few moments of silence passed as Sakura thought about whether or not to say anything. Finally, she responded, "It just, some things that got me thinking is all. Like, have I been wasting my time?" And she trailed off. "Oh boy, I know that feeling." Mabuki shook her head and then called out, "Kazashi, I think our daughter's taken one of those long, hard looks at herself." "Oh, looked into the mirror, has she?" Her father's good-natured voice called back. In a few moments, he joined them. "Well, that's no reflection on her. I do it all the time." "Dad," Sakura groaned in exasperation. Soon, Kazashi joined them. Her father was a man who stood just over 6 feet with blue eyes and dull pink hair, which he styled into her namesake cherry blossoms. He had a bit of stubble and sideburns that flowed into an angular mustache. He wore a simple green obi, burgundy-colored pants, and a silver necklace with a pink cherry blossom design. He gave his daughter a kind smile as he sat down on the opposite end of the bed as her mother. "So what did you see that's got you so down? And what brought it on in the first place?" Her mother added. She sighed, knowing they weren't going to leave her alone, and so she caved. She told them everything. Of how she'd secretly agreed with Naruto about being fed up with the tediousness of D-rank missions. How glad she'd been to receive their first C rank. The attack of those 2 Chunin and the revelation that it was far more dangerous than advertised. Their decision to press on and their first encounter with Zabuza, revealing to them just how deep in it they were. The masked boy, life in wave, and finally, the events on the bridge. Her parents had mostly stayed quiet. Although, they'd expressed anger at Kakashi-sensei, deciding not to cancel the mission and come back. She didn't hold it against him. Everything had turned out all right for the most part, and who knows how things in Wave would have gone down if they'd assumed it was only a B-rank job and sent a bunch of chunin. They had been surprised that Naruto had been the hero of the day. His plan to free their sensei. Once again, all Naruto and Sasuke, she'd just stood there and watched. How determined he'd been after hearing Inari's story. How he'd inspired the people of Wave and brought them out of despair. The apparent death of Sasuke, the real death of the masked boy, and how he'd reacted to it all. She'd seen them exchanging looks she couldn't read a few times. Well, first let me say good riddance to this Gato, Mabuki said, her face wrinkled in disgust at what the man had done. Here, here. Her father wholeheartedly agreed. He then smiled at her as he placed a hand on her shoulder. Now, why does all this have you looking so glum? You helped save a nation. On your first real mission, no less. You should be celebrating. No, I didn't, Sakura said dully. I didn't do anything. I just stood guard of Tsunade. It was all Sasuke, Naruto, and Kakashi-sensei. You don't think guarding the client's an important job? Mabuki asked in a deadpan as if she thought she was being stupid. Not when I couldn't have protected him if my life depended on it, she said before grimacing slightly. Which it would have, she added before looking away. If the masked kid, or even those two chunin we fought on the road had gotten past everyone else, I wouldn't have lasted 2 seconds. And the only time Tsunade was attacked, it was Zabuza. We'd be dead if Kakashi-sensei hadn't saved us. What good's a guard who can't even protect herself? She sighed deeply as all the fights ran through her mind again. Naruto and Sasuke saved Kakashi-sensei when Zabuza had him trapped. They fought the masked kid. Kakashi-sensei protected Tsunade the one time he needed it. Naruto inspired the people of Wave to stand up. I couldn't do anything. I can't even say I've ever helped them. All I've ever done is put Naruto down and fawn over Sasuke, and I can't even do that right. I mouthed off about Naruto being an orphan in front of Sasuke. Her mother's grimace told her she agreed with how bad that was. I'm not a good ninja, or a good person, am I? Sakura, Kazashi began, but her mother cut him off. Well, if we're being honest, it was pretty low of you to break off your friendship with that Ino girl after she stood up for you. Mabuki began with a hand on her chin, earning a light glare from her husband. Sakura sat up and frowned at her mother. Are you going to tell me Sasuke isn't worth it? She dared her mother to tell her that true love wasn't something worth fighting over. Instead, her mother just made a single quiet laugh and gave her a lopsided grin. So she's a rival for the boy you like. Friendly rivalries are a thing, you know? Oh, yeah, that's true, wasn't it? She'd seen them in some of the stories she'd read and on TV shows. So, she'd broken the only real friendship she'd had, with a girl who defended her from bullies when they first met, for nothing. Yep. Another mark on the tally of proof Sakura Haruno is a terrible person. But you're missing something very important here. Mabuki continued looking at her seriously before smiling and placing a hand on her head. Sakura, you're a child. Exactly. You're barely in your teens. Kazashi agreed. Children make stupid mistakes. It's what you do. What we did when we were that age. The important thing is that you recognize them, learn from them, and do what you can to make up for them. He smiled at her. None of that is anything you can't fix or make up for, right? I guess not. Then try to figure out what you need to work on. What she needed to work on. The things she'd need to fix or make up for. She had some thinking to do. Kakashi sat at a table in his home, his head resting on his hand. He hummed quietly in thought as he closed his eye. He hadn't done a good job of leading those kids, had he? They hadn't been ready for that. Well, that was pretty obvious. He'd had to teach them the tree-climbing exercise mid-mission. He was proud of them for having made it through, but was under no delusions that it wasn't a close call. Everything Lord Third had said to him was something he'd realized when they'd thought Sasuke was dead on the bridge. This was the first time he'd led a team of apprentices. He hadn't been on a team like this since he was under a Jonin sensei himself. Perhaps he'd been too hands-off when it came to training them? Had he been expecting too much when he decided to push on? Well, hindsight was 20/20, as they say. The more important part was what was he going to do about it now? He'd need to step up their training. The Chunin exams were coming up and he wanted to enter them, which meant he'd need to work fast. Hopefully, what happened in Wave would be a wake-up call for them too. He'd need to think of how best to nurture their talents. He'd need to get some litmus paper to check for their elements. Sakura was clearly dealing with feelings of inadequacy. Hopefully, her parents would help with that. She was more likely to open up to them. But if it continued on, he'd step in. With any luck, it would help push her to actually apply herself. With her chakra control and her academic prowess, she had the makings of a great medical ninja and jinjutsu specialist. But that was something of a problem for him. His jinjutsu skills were a step above decent, but he was no master. His proficiency in that art beyond the basics came mainly from his Sharingan. As for medical ninjutsu, that would take too long with the time frame he was working with. Well, maybe not medical ninjutsu itself, but the knowledge that came with it could be useful. Anatomy, pressure points, and of course the art of making poisons and antidotes. Those were things she could work on by herself that would help her. Not to mention improve her ability to handle simple injuries in the meantime. It was a far cry from having a medic on the team, but it could still save lives or turn a potential failure into a success. He'd also need to pick up some scrolls on Jinjutsu for her. The only Jinjutsu specialist he knew was currently leading a team of her own. She needed a lot of work on the physical aspects of combat, and he'd need to work out what kind of style would best suit her. If she decided to pursue medical ninjutsu later, probably something centered around dodging. Sasuke. Well, in his case, he didn't need anyone to push him, just some more guidance. And Naruto. Well, after thinking about it a bit, he believed he had the perfect idea to take advantage of his natural attributes. And his impromptu plan to save him from Zabuza, not to mention learning the shadow clone jutsu in only a few hours, showed that he had untapped talent. He'd need some brushing up in every category, but his strategy should help that immensely. He'd probably want to explore his clan's talent too. He could help with that. But the chains, he couldn't help him there. He knew some of what they could do, but had no idea how to do any of it. And it was all far beyond Naruto's current level anyway. The best he could do there is help improve Naruto's control of chakra, and he'd be doing that for all of them anyway. And when he thought about it, he really should have been there more for the kid. For his sensei's son. He knew what it was like to be an orphan, knew how the villagers would treat him in the wake of the Kyuubi attack. But he'd been too busy dealing with his own losses and pouring himself into his work as a coping mechanism. He recalled how Minato-sensei had tried so many different tactics to help pull him from that same mentality after his last teammate's death. He would be so disappointed. Right, he had a lot to make up for. So, help with their elements. Push Sakura to train and study the body and poisons. Work on Naruto's knowledge and improve their taijutsu. Help Sasuke with the Sharingan and help Naruto improve his skill with the chains as best he could. Okay, he had a plan. He made a note of which stores to visit for the supplies he needed. At least tomorrow he'd have a reason to be late. Naruto sat on the roof of his apartment complex, staring at the face of the fourth Hokage's monument, his father's face. He still had conflicting emotions about that, but they'd mostly settled. He couldn't say he completely understood or forgave him, but he chose to believe what Hiruzen did, that his father had trusted him. He looked down at the piece of paper in his hand, the only thing that Hiruzen had given him, given the secret around his parents. A picture of his mother, a slender woman with long red hair that Hiruzen told him was common for their clan, and violet eyes. Fair skin as opposed to his own, but he could see he got his face from her. She wore a high-collared, sleeveless blouse under a green dress. She was smiling widely, a hand on her hip and a fist pumped in the air. It was a warm feeling, knowing that his parents had loved him, especially after he'd learned about the Kyuubi. But in a way it hurt more, knowing now just what had been taken from him. Hiruzen had told him how excited they'd been when they'd found out they would be parents, how much they'd cared for each other, and he'd never gotten to meet them. The fourth Hokage, that brought him back to something else that had been weighing on his mind. To be Hokage means to protect all in this village, to serve as a pillar of support for everyone, and mark the road for its people to follow. Well, his father and the old man certainly did that. The third, who had once told him that everyone in this village was his family, who did everything he could to be there for him and everyone else. His father, who gave everything for this village. He had a long way to go. What would his parents see if they saw him now? What kind of example was he setting for others to follow? Right. Well, no better time than the present to get started. Pocketing the picture of his mother and giving one last look to the Hokage monument, he silently went inside. He walked down the stairs and made his way to his apartment, turning the key and opening the door. He looked around and grimaced. Trash everywhere. Flies around the appliances. Fridge probably half filled with spoiled goods. He'd tried to take care of the place when he was younger, but all too often he'd find himself too downhearted by the villagers' looks or something his teacher did to bother. Put that together with the fact that no one ever visited him aside from Irika and the old man, who usually took him out, and at some point he'd just stopped caring. The old man had told him a lot about his father. He said that he'd been meticulous. He'd be pretty embarrassed if he knew this was how his son lived. Huh? To say nothing of what his mother would say. He shivered as one story that the old man had shared in particular came to him. The story of how the other kids had teased his mother relentlessly about how her round face and red hair when she was in the academy. They said it made her look like a tomato. They kept this up until she snapped and beat the ever-loving crap out of all of them, her red hair whipping in every direction like a demon's. And that was before she'd had the fox sealed inside of her. That event had earned her a new nickname, the Red Hot-Blooded Habanero. He had a feeling that if she could see this, he'd be on the receiving end of that temper. Yeah, that would be a decent enough first step. Now that he thought about it, living like this couldn't be a good idea, could it? He put his hands together in a cross-shaped sign. Shadow Clone Jutsu. In a burst of smoke, 5 copies of his appeared. All right, guys, you know what to do. And with cheers of agreement, Naruto and his clones got to cleaning up the mess he'd been living in for the last half-decade. Why am I not surprised? Naruto ground out as he leaned back against the wooden pole, staring at the sky above. Here he was with Sasuke and Sakura at the 3rd training ground, the place where Team 7 had officially formed, and the place where Kakashi-sensei had told them they'd be meeting today. As per usual, it was well over an hour past when he said they'd meet, and the man was nowhere in sight. How is this fair? He tells us to meet him and keeps us waiting every day. Sakura yelled in frustration. Sasuke, meanwhile, remained silent as he leaned against one of the 3 logs sticking up from the ground. Naruto was glad to see that a night at home seemed to have done Sakura some good. She seemed to be back to her energetic old self for the most part. He'd been worrying about her. I wish he didn't have us meet in different places every time. Then I could set something up to get back at him for leaving us hanging, Naruto growled, crossing his arms before he grinned at Sakura. Think he'd agree if we invited him for ramen or something? I bet I could come up with something good if I put my mind to it. I wouldn't try it, Sakura answered back. After seeing what he's like in the field, I get the feeling he was just humoring us with that eraser thing. I doubt he'd really fall for something like that. Naruto clicked his tongue. Yeah, you're probably right. Ugh, next time I'm bringing a book or something, Sakura growled, hands on her hips as she began to tap her foot. Well, isn't that a coincidence? I happen to have brought a few books for you. Kakashi's voice rang out, causing the genin to look to the river behind them. Kakashi appeared in a burst of smoke, giving them his eye smile and a wave. Sorry I'm late. I had to help a kid find his lost pet. Your excuses suck, sensei. Naruto deadpanned while Sakura raised a trembling fist in the silver-haired man's direction. Then what he said clicked, and she was caught flat-foot. Wait, you've got a book for me? She asked, looking at him in confusion. Among other things, Kakashi replied as his sole visible eye roamed over his students. I feel I may have taken a bit too much of a laissez-faire approach to training you. His gaze settled on Naruto. In all honesty, I should have taught you the tree-climbing exercise, and more, quite a bit before we took that mission to Wave. He then smiled again and pulled out a small sheet of paper, holding it between 2 fingers. So, from here on out, we'll be taking fewer missions and doing more training. Kakashi-sensei, what's that? Sakura asked, clearly as lost as he was on what a sheet of paper would do for them. Oh, this? This is known as chakra induction paper. Kakashi told them. It's used to test one's elemental affinity. While you can learn how to use any element, everyone has one they have a natural inclination for. That one will be more powerful and easier for them to use. All you have to do is channel your chakra into this paper. And at that moment, the paper suddenly crinkled in his hand. And voila! How it reacts tells you the holder's affinity. Mine's lightning, so the paper wrinkles. With the water element, it gets wet. Fire, it burns to ash. Earth it turns to dirt, and with wind, it'll split in two. Cool. So you're going to use that to figure out what kind of jutsu to teach us? Naruto asked excitedly. That more than made up for him being late. That's right. Kakashi nodded. Oh, incidentally, a little tidbit you might want to know. You need to have mastered a minimum of 2 elements to qualify to become a jonin. A bit far off, but it's something to keep in mind if you don't want to stop at chunin. Now, let's get started. The jonin held out 3 sheets of paper. The Jinin stepped forward, joining Kakashi at the river's edge, and took 1 slip of paper each. They paused, staring at their sheets for a few moments, before one by one channeling chakra into them. Sasuke's was first, burning to ash. Sakura's crumbled away while Naruto's split in half. Well, looks like Naruto and Sakura have the wind and earth affinities. Sasuke's fire is no surprise. That's the norm for the Uchiha clan. Kakashi noted. It's fitting from what I've seen of your styles. Wind is an offense-oriented element, known for cutting and piecing foes, though you can also project solid walls of wind for defense. It's also very effective when combined with fire. Wind will feed the flames and intensify them. Earth, on the other hand, is pretty balanced. You can make blunt force or piercing stones, summon walls of earth, and traverse the ground for sneak attacks. It offers a wide range of possibilities. Ah yeah, we're going to kicking ass and taking names. Naruto grinned widely, punching an open palm. But before we start on that, we'll be working on improving your chakra control. Huh, again? Yes, proper control of your chakra is important. In fact, it's likely why you kept failing in the academy. Kakashi replied. Wait, what? Naruto asked in confusion. Kakashi nodded. The more chakra you have, the more difficult it is to control. While it gives you a lot of stamina, you waste a lot of extra energy on techniques. Worse, some techniques, like the clone jutsu, for example, and jinjutsu in general, require refined chakra control or have pretty strict requirements. Overload them, and they won't work at all. His gaze then turned to Sasuke. Sasuke possessed an exceptional amount of chakra for your age. He then turned to Naruto. But you, by any standards, the amount of chakra you possess are enormous. For a brief moment, Naruto was excited to hear that. Then that withered on the vine as he remembered why he had so much chakra. Sakura raised a brow beside him before she turned to her sensei. So, the reason Naruto kept failing the academy's test is that he couldn't control his chakra well enough to use the clone jutsu? Because he has so much of it? Sakura asked, seeming to wonder how much chakra he had for that to be the case from how she was looking at him. That's right. He likely would have passed the normal way had someone thought to take him aside and help him refine his chakra control. Kakashi replied. But I've thought of a way to take advantage of that. Naruto, have you ever noticed that you remember things you shouldn't when you use the shadow clone jutsu? Huh. Naruto hummed in thought, crossing his arms as he racked his brain for what his sensei could mean. Okay, maybe a demonstration is in order. And with that, he created a single shadow clone that immediately began to walk off into the nearby forest. Naruto, create a shadow clone of your own and have it follow mine. The blonde did so and they waited. So what are we waiting on? Naruto blinked as thoughts came rushing to him. Sasuke frowned while Sakura looked curious. What is it? She asked. My clone beat Kakashi in rock, paper, scissors. Right, Kakashi said. You see, when a shadow clone disperses, no matter how that is, its remaining chakra and all of its memories return to the user. Naruto probably would have noticed had he used the clones in any way other than having them work or fight alongside him. If my theory is right, then this should apply to accumulated experience as well. Meaning, if you have 5 shadow clones working with you on learning a new skill, you should progress 5 times faster. Naruto began to raise a cheer in excitement. But there's a catch. That caused Naruto to stop. The mental fatigue will carry over too. And if you spread your chakra too thin, you won't be able to accomplish anything. You're probably the only one here who can take full advantage of this training, and it'll probably leave you barely on your feet. Well, I'm up for it. This was great. With this, he'd catch up to Sasuke in no time. Actually, now that I think about it, Sakura might be able to some make use of this too. Kakashi put a hand on his chin. All 3 were surprised. Even Sasuke raised his brows before looking at Sakura in confusion. Huh? Sakura seemed perplexed. She then began frantically waving her hands in front of her. Whoa, 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 what are you talking about, sensei? I don't have that much chakra. You don't, Kakashi affirmed, and Sakura stopped moving. In fact, with the amount of chakra you have, I'd normally recommend you not use this jutsu at all, and certainly not for training. The pink-haired girl seemed to deflate at that. But as I said, I have some reading material for you. Or maybe homework would be a good way to put it. With that, Kakashi pulled out a scroll from his flak jacket and kneeled down, unfurling it on the ground before placing a hand on the seal at the center of the paper. In a burst of smoke, several books and scrolls appeared. Sakura, looking at your talents, I believe you have excellent potential for medical ninjutsu, as well as jinjutsu. Really? Yes. Both require fine chakra control, which you seem to have a gift for. The latter requires you have a deep understanding of chemicals and the body, which should be right up your alley given your academic record. Now, I'm no specialist, but I can help you with jinjutsu. Medical ninjutsu, on the other hand, is not something I have any experience in. And quite frankly, it would take too long for you to explore on the deadline I'm looking at. At his Jinin's quizzical gaze, he added, more on that later. Anyway, while medical ninjutsu might be out of the question now, the knowledge that goes with it, anatomy, pressure points, and with them where and how to hit someone for maximum effect, how to identify and create poisons and antidotes, that could be helpful. Hence, your homework. With that, he gestured to the books before him. I want you to study these while at home. The Shadow Clone Jutsu might be useful on that front since you'll only be studying and won't use any chakra. His voice became harsher as his gaze sharpened, carrying an authority they hadn't heard outside of the battles with Zabuza. Let me stress that you are not to use this technique outside of studying. Not in training, and definitely not in the field. And don't use more than one clone. With the amount of chakra you have, you'd run the risk of dangerous levels of chakra exhaustion. Sakura shivered slightly, and Naruto didn't blame her. He knew enough to know chakra exhaustion was dangerous stuff. Don't worry. I understand, sensei. Good. Well, I guess I'll be teaching you that technique then, Kakashi said with a shrug. All right. We'll be working on a more advanced chakra control exercise for the first hour of training. And with that, he turned away and walked towards the river. Naruto's eyes widened as he stepped on the water's surface and walked across it as if it was solid ground. Oh yeah, he remembered his sensei and Zabuza fighting on the water the first time. They were going to learn that. Awesome. You'll be learning to walk on water for the next hour. Afterward, we'll be working on your Taijutsu skills. Naruto, I want you to create 8 clones. I want 3 to accompany you in this exercise. For we'll get started on wind element training, and the last will be brushing up on things you clearly need a refresher course on from the academy. Let's see how well you handle that before we consider moving on to adding to that number. Naruto nodded and did as he was told. In a burst of smoke, 8 doppelgangers appeared around him. In short order, they were all working on their assigned tasks. The 3 Genin stood at the edge of the river, looking determined. Okay, now I want you to run onto the water, using your chakra to repel it and keep from falling into the river. You're going to feel the difference between this and tree climbing very quickly. The shifting surface of the water will force you to adjust your chakra by the moment, or you'll fall in. Stop and focus on keeping above the water when you feel you have to, but try to get as far as you can, okay? And go. The 3 immediately took off running. The moment Naruto's foot touched the water, he immediately knew what Kakashi had been talking about. He could feel the way it moved under his feet, the way his soles would waver between standing solidly and being dragged under by gravity. And the whole thing threw his sense of balance out the window. He made it 3 steps before he had to stop, holding out his arms to keep upright as he struggled to maintain control. Sasuke made it a lot farther. 8 steps before he came to a near standstill. Even so, he kept moving, fighting to keep standing before taking 1 quick step forward. Sakura made it even farther, though she was forced to walk. She even managed to stay steady. Almost. Naruto lasted about 10 seconds before he slipped into the water with a splash. 5 hours later, training for the day had been complete, and the 3 Genin were on the ground. Naruto had fallen onto his butt and leaned back, propping himself up with his hands, his shoulders heaving as he panted heavily. He was sore all over. Kakashi had hit him hard whenever he'd made a mistake. And he'd made a lot of mistakes. Sakura was lying on her back a ways away, staring listlessly at the sky where she'd fallen at the end of her own training session. Sasuke sat on one of the posts, an arm on his knee. He had mostly recovered, the only sign of his own training/beating being the scuffles on his clothes. Kakashi's Taijutsu session had been grueling. He'd had them come at him one by one, making sure to hammer in every flaw in their fighting style. Naruto had been the last, and his fighting style had overall needed the most work. Kakashi had said Naruto fought more like a brawler than a trained shinobi, not really even having a fighting style at all. Still, he had the trained reflexes shinobi were known for, and strength and speed to make up for it. He winced as he looked over at Sakura, lying on the ground. Sakura didn't even have that much going for her. Oh, she fought with a style, but it was pretty clear she hadn't done much practice, and her physical abilities were, well, Kakashi had said subpar. That was the kindest way he could put it. She'd gotten the worst of this first session. All right, I think I have a good idea of what you need to work on, Kakashi said, nodded to himself. Good work. Let's call it a day. Wait a minute, Kakashi-sensei, Naruto interjected, his breathing starting to calm. What is it? Naruto took a breath and rose to his feet, looking at his sensei with determination. I was wondering, can you teach me sealing jutsu? You want to try out your clan's art? Kakashi asked rhetorically before thinking about it. Well, I'm not sure you're suited for it. Just because your clan excelled in it doesn't necessarily mean you will. Naruto deflated a bit at that. But we won't know until we try. I was just waiting for you to ask, to be honest. Now the blonde looked up in excitement. It's a bit more involved, so we'll handle it more like a tutoring session. I'll come by your place a few hours after we've trained, give you time to cool off, and then we'll see what you can do. Keep in mind there's going to be a lot of reading involved, but I'll try to make more practical exercises since you seem to learn better by doing. Thanks, Kakashi-sensei. Irika made his way up the familiar stairs that led to Naruto's apartment. The sun had made it 3/4 of the way across the sky to the horizon. The Chunin figured that by now, Naruto would be back from training or a mission. He'd been worried about his former student after what he heard happened on his sea should have been an A-rank mission. That had surprised him, especially when he'd learned that they'd found out the client had lied midway to wave and kept going anyway. He'd wanted to tear into Kakashi for that one. Taking experienced genin on a B-rank or even A-rank mission was one thing, but green ones who'd never been on a mission that wasn't basically a chore? But he hadn't. He was sure that anything he had to say, the third had already said. The fact that he'd learned that Naruto had had his first kill was a far more pressing concern on his mind. Reaching the blonde's apartment, Irika knocked on the door. Naruto, you there? He waited for a few seconds, then he heard the latch click. Naruto opened the door and smiled up at his former sensei. Hey, Irika-sensei. Good to see you. Irika chuckled. Same to you, Naruto. He then looked past the blonde, and his eyebrows rose. What had once been something of a pigsty had now decently clean. Not perfect, but a vast improvement on what was there before. The trash had been picked up, no signs of leftover food. The sink was clear. Looks like someone finally decided to do some picking up around the house. Naruto chuckled, smiling widely as he rubbed the back of his head. Yeah, it was kinda gross, huh? This was a good sign. The blonde seemed to be in high spirits, as usual. The scarred Chunin knew Kakashi would help him through processing it, and that some time had passed, but he knew from personal experience that this kind of thing lingered with you. Plus, it had been a while since he saw his favorite student. Well, I'm glad to see you took some initiative on it, Irika replied before pointing his thumb behind him. You up for some ramen? You know it. Lord Third told you about the Uzumaki clan? Irika asked, blinking in surprise as he and Naruto sat at the blonde's favorite ramen stand. You knew? Naruto responded in shock. The instructor could only rub the back of his head sheepishly. Sorry, kinda slipped my mind. People don't really like talking about the Uzumaki clan after what happened. He really only knew vague details. What he did know, everyone who was an active shinobi at the time felt they shouldn't have missed the attack that destroyed the ill-fated village. They considered their failure to save them a disgrace and didn't like being reminded of it. It wasn't a taboo subject, but it was close enough that it wouldn't occur to most to bring it up, himself included. He couldn't help but feel a bit ashamed of that. Learning he had a heritage to live up to might have lit a fire in the boy and compelled him to train harder. Yeah, the old man told me that, Naruto said, trailing off and staring into the steaming bowl before him. Iruka's face fell. He imagined it was a mixed feeling, finding out he came from a big family with a legacy to live up to after being on his own for so long. But at the same time, he found out they were gone and that he wasn't likely to meet any of them. Feeling now was as good a time as any to broach the subject. Iruka asked, "So, how are you holding up? After the mission, I mean?" Naruto flinched slightly, clearly guessing what he meant. "All right, I guess. From what Kakashi-sensei told me, anyway." He looked to his former sensei. "Is it normal to have nightmares after all this time?" "Yeah." Iruka trailed off before asking, "Want to talk about it?" Naruto proceeded to give him a more detailed account of what happened during the mission. The Chunin grimaced as he thought about it. Yeah, he can definitely understand seeing red at the death of a comrade. He knew the blonde must be beating himself up after finding out the boy faked it and meant to spare them all along. Given who his master was, you couldn't have known he'd do that. I mean, he followed someone who killed 100 academy students when he was just a boy. "I know," Naruto responded. Iruka sighed, "But knowing that doesn't make you feel better." "Yeah, I understand." There was a moment of silence before Naruto spoke again. "I don't know when I felt worse. When I really realized I'd killed that guy when he'd only faked killing Sasuke, or when I thought Sasuke was dying in my arms because I'd been stupid. Just be thankful your teammate's still alive," Iruka advised. "That situation could have turned out any number of ways, some a lot worse than others." "Yeah, I know." There was a moment of silence before Iruka broke it. "So, how have things been going with your team since then?" Naruto smiled. "Pretty good, I guess. Sasuke's the same as always, but I think he talks even less than he did before. Sakura hasn't yelled at me for the last few weeks. Kakashi-sensei's been training us harder. He really worked us into the ground today. We were all beat when we went home, but he's still late every day. It's crazy. What could he be doing that takes so much time?" I don't know him that well, but he's got a reputation for being late whenever he can afford to be. My suggestion, take something light you can do that won't tire you out for whatever he's got in mind to every meeting," Iruka said. Naruto frowned before shrugging. Better than waiting around for Kakashi-sensei every day." And with that, he went back to his bowl, drinking down the last of it. He sighed as he set it down, only for another to be placed in front of him. "Huh. Figured you could use another. You usually go for a few rounds," Tucci said, smiling at his favorite customer. "I happened to overhear you had a rough time of it, so this one's on the house." "Thanks, old man Tucci." "Haha, don't mention it," the old man replied with a hearty laugh. "And don't shy away if you're feeling down, okay? I am at it. We may not be shinobi, but we're here if you need to talk, okay?" Iruka smiled, thankful for the reminder that some cared for the blonde. Sakura looked at herself in the mirror, her eyes determined. She'd thought long and hard on her father's advice, on what she needed to work on and make up for. There was still a lot she needed to figure out, but she had a good starting point. The first thing that had come to her mind was her team. So far, she hadn't really contributed anything besides taking up some of the work on D-rank missions. She'd done a bit to help Naruto when he was dealing with the aftermath of the battle on the bridge, but that was massively outweighed by how she'd put him down before. She'd never really done anything for Sasuke, and if they were to go on any dangerous mission now, even an actual C rank, she knew she'd probably just slow them down. That had to change. Being there for them would be tough. Sakura didn't even know where to begin, but it was easy enough to not yell at Naruto for every little thing. Of course, he hadn't actually done anything to annoy her lately, but still, she just had to keep in mind to be kinder and more considerate to Naruto and more supportive of both of them. Really supportive, not just toadying when it came to Sasuke. And she needed to stop being dead weight. And that meant she needed to train. Kakashi had taken to teaching them how to fight more effectively. And, wow, had he hammered into her head how much work she needed. But it wouldn't be enough to just train her skills. She needed to be faster, stronger, and that meant some personal training. The books Kakashi had given her were lying on her bed. She'd get started on that later tonight. Unfortunately, she didn't have the shadow clone jutsu down yet, but she was sure she would soon enough. For now, she needed to exercise. But where to start? Sakura considered her options for a moment before deciding to try out a ninja tool shop. They'd have to have something that would help speed things up, and maybe some advice if it was run by an actual ninja. She nodded to herself and made her way to the door. Once outside, she considered where she should start. She knew the weapon shop she used was probably a no-go, as she knew it was run by civilians. They might be able to help her, but she still thought a ninja-run shop would be her best bet. She remembered a shop she used to pass by on her way to the academy and decided to try that one out first. No luck. The shop owner knew his tools but didn't have much advice for training beyond the standard. So she continued her search. 2 shops later, and Sakura hadn't found much other than disappointment. They had, in fact, been run by civilians, and so they hadn't had much advice for her on where to start. They did at least offer quality gear, but she'd had a decent supply of weapons, so that hadn't offered her anything. She could only hope this one would have what she was looking for. As the door creaked open, she heard a voice within the store. "Yo, Tenji, is my order in yet?" The pink-haired girl stepped inside the store to see a slightly older girl standing at the counter, talking to the shop owner. She was a bit taller than Sakura, with dark brown hair shaped into 2 buns. She wore a pink, sleeveless cheapao blouse with yellow buttons and dark green pants. "Why, yes indeed. Just came in fact. Sorry for the delay," the shopkeeper said, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. He was a man who looked to be in his late 40s, wearing a simple white shirt, black pants, and a forge apron. He was tall, standing slightly higher than her sensei with a muscular build, almost like a bodybuilder. He had short black hair cut flat at the top and coal-colored eyes. "That's okay, just let me see the goods. I've got to keep my arsenal stocked up," she said, leaning forward onto the counter, and Sakura could practically hear the smile in her voice. The man laughed. "You got it. Only the best for my #1 customer." He turned around and walked behind the draped doorway that led to the back. As Sakura walked into the store, the girl turned to see her, allowing the pink-haired girl to see she had eyes that matched her hair. She gave her a cheerful wave. "Hey there, you look lost." "Huh. Yeah, I guess I am." Sakura shrugged. "I usually only come to places like this to buy tools." "Oh, looking for something new?" the girl asked conversationally. "Maybe I can help out. Name's Tenten, by the way, you?" "Sakura Haruno." The pink-haired girl returned before looking around, focusing on training equipment. "I'm looking for something to kickstart my training, but I barely know where to start." The other shopkeepers were civilians, so they couldn't really tell me anything besides the obvious. Tenten raised a brow and gave Sakura an appraising eye after looking at her forehead protector. "Just getting started, huh?" Yeah, I kinda have a lot to make up for." Now Tenten looked a little irked, resting an arm on the counter. You're one of those fangirls who don't take being a kunoichi seriously, aren't you?" Sakura cringed. Yeah, that pretty much summed up how she'd been until now. She could understand why Tenten was annoyed. She probably had experience with people like her. While she thought her academics marked her as a great ninja in the making before, she could see now how someone like her would give kunoichi a bad name. She could deny it, but she wouldn't. She was facing her mistakes and moving past them, and that meant owning up to them. I was. My team and I had our first real mission not too long ago. It was bad. I couldn't do anything but stand on the sidelines." She stood up straight and looked at the older girl resolutely. "It was a wake-up call. I want to change. I want to be able to fight beside them instead of holding them back like I did before, so here I am." Tintin seemed to weigh her words before smiling. "Well, in that case, I'll be happy to help." She then frowned. "Though from what I know of your type, my first bit of advice is stop dieting." She stressed those last 2 words. Your body needs fuel, you know? You need calories and the right nutrients to build up muscle. If you don't eat right, it could slow or even kill your progress. Sakura grimaced. She hadn't even thought of that. "Yeah, that makes sense." Tintin sighed and ran a hand through her hair. Where to begin? It was at that point that the shopkeeper returned from the back. He was holding a pretty large roll, big enough that he had to carry it on his shoulders. "Here you go. Everything you asked for." With that, he unfurled it on the counter, and wow, it covered the whole thing. There were dozens, probably well over 100 different weapons inside. Shuriken, kunai, kuzurigama, daggers, short swords, you name it. If it was smaller than a katana, it was probably there. Whoa, overkill much, she thought as Tintin ran back to the counter. As if all that weren't enough, He added 3 scrolls on top of that, though apparently there was enough trust between them that Tenten didn't feel the need to test it. Her eyes gleamed as she looked over the various pointy objects before she hurriedly took out a check. Nice. Thanks, old man. No, thank you, he said, taking the check. She wasn't surprised he was grateful. If Tenten made purchases like that all the time, she probably half paid to keep him in business by herself. That was an exaggeration, of course. Probably. So who's this? Friend of yours? Tenji asked, looking to her while the bun-haired brunette pulled out a sealing scroll of her own, sealed away the roll of weapons, and put all 4 in her pouch. Oh, just a rookie, looking to better herself. The obviously a weapons specialist answered before gesturing an open hand towards her. Tenji, this is Sakura. Sakura, let me introduce you to Tenji, one of the best weapon dealers in the village. The shop owner rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. I hardly think so, but I'm not going to turn down free advertisement, he said with a chuckle before turning a grin to the pink-haired girl. So, looking for something to help in training, I take it? At her nod, he stepped out from behind the counter and put a hand to his chin. How about some arm and leg weights to start with? Tenten suggested. He shrugged. Yeah, good as place as any. He gestured for her to follow as he walked over to a far wall with all sorts of training equipment on display. Sakura was doubtful. Arm and leg weights. Tenten nodded. Yeah, sounds simple, but they really do help. You've just got to make sure you use both, or you'll screw up your balance. Unless you're looking to focus on punches or kicks, or you want to make yourself a speed freak. Ah, here we go, he said, placing his hands on a display. These are top of the line. You could go with the standard weights and have to switch them out whenever you're looking to increase the weight. Or you could use these. The objects on display look like standard wrist and ankle guards. These babies have sealing jutsu engraved on the inside. Just channel chakra into them to increase the weight. Too much, just touch and release the chakra inside, like any sealing scroll, and it goes back to normal. Just don't go overboard with all of them at once and turn yourself into a living floor mat. And they're perfect for training, he said with a laugh that said he probably knew people who'd turned themselves into anchors with these things. Huh. Okay, that was pretty neat. So, how much for them? The pink-haired Jinin asked, thinking in the back of her mind she should get some for Naruto and Sasuke too while she was at it. It would help them out just the same, and it'd be a good first step towards being a truly helpful teammate. 5,200 Ryo a set. That's wrist or ankle guards, not both. Sakura stared for a moment. Then her eyes bugged out into large pits of solid white. What? What? Tell me they aren't worth it. Though, to be fair, you could get the same result for free if you're good with sealing jutsu. Or if you know someone who is. He raised a brow. You got those skills? Or got a friend who does? Well, nice of him to give her an out. Unfortunately, she wasn't sure she did. Kakashi said he'd tutor Naruto in the art, but she didn't know for sure how good he was. Besides, if he could have done something like this, wouldn't he have suggested it already? She then remembered how he didn't teach them the tree climbing exercise until they were on an A-rank mission. Suddenly, she wasn't so sure. She turned to look forlornly at the training tools. 31200 Ryo, plus tax. This would wipe out her entire savings. Everything she'd saved up before graduation and all the pay from their missions. She could only barely afford it because of that time they captured Tora. The one reason that there wasn't a strike on that particular mission, despite how annoying that cat was and how many times it got away. It was owned by the wife of the fire daimyo. That meant refusal was not an option, and the pay was good. Well, going to go for it, Tenten asked by her side. Personally, I don't really have a preference, and my teammate prefers the old-fashioned kind, but it's your choice. Sakura looked at the display before mentally kissing her savings goodbye. I'll take 3 sets of each. Sakura stared at the scroll that now contained her newly bought training gear as she walked down the road, her face slightly pale. Wow, really generous of you to buy some for your teammates too, Tenten said, raising a brow. It was for the team, Sakura replied in monotone. After how I acted, I owe them. This is the least I can do, she said without a hint of emotion. Well, nice to know you're serious about making it up to them, Tenten said with a sympathetic smile. Sakura got the feeling she'd probably blown all her money on weapons at one point or another. Got any more advice? Yeah, Get a light start tonight, but talk to your sensei before doing anything too extreme. You don't want to overdo it when you're just starting out. Pace yourself, and once you get used to it, start pushing harder. Tenten continued as Sakura nodded absent-mindedly, thoughts still on her empty savings. The brunette seemed to take pity on her. Let's talk more over lunch. My treat. She gave a slight laugh. I get the feeling you won't be eating out on your own for a while. Sakura grimaced. Yeah, thanks. Anywhere you want to go in particular? Sakura closed her eyes and set aside all thought of her practically non-existent bank account with some difficulty. This would probably be the last time she could eat out in a while. Might as well get what she liked best. How about the Nakamura's Dango shop? Sounds good to me. It didn't take too long for the two girls to make it to the shop. Sakura ordered her favorite, and Mitsu, while Tenten just went with the shop's signature dish. So what's your team like? Tenten asked after swallowing the first bite of her dango. Sakura looked up from her and Mitsu before looking to the sky. Well, there's Sasuke. Sasuke Uchiha. She curled in on herself and blushed. The guy you like? Tenten guessed. She nodded. He's just so cool. He was at the top of our class. He's always aloof, never lets anything get to him. He's just so dreamy. Reminds me of my teammate, Tenten commented. The aloof part, I mean. Not that I want to ask him out or anything. His name's Niji Hyuga. Always serious, kinda on the cold side. But that's a bit of a breath of fresh air on my team. Oh, Sakura voiced curiously. Tenten tilted her head back and placed a hand on her head, looking like she'd gotten a headache. My other teammate, Rock Lee, and my sensei Guy are kinda nuts. No, I take that back. They are nuts. They're always so intense. Then train until you drop types, and always screaming about the power of youth. She said the last words in an ardent voice before looking to the side, her expression a combination of annoyed and exhausted. They make these insane challenges for themselves all the time. Like, if I can't do 500 squats, then I will do 600 push-ups, or if I can't do 300 sit-ups, I will do 100 laps around the village. She sighed. I just wish they'd cool down and grow up a bit. Sakura chuckled. Sounds tough, but at least your sensei makes you work hard. Mine was hands off, to put things lightly. He's only now starting to shape up after we almost got killed. Tenten frowned. What? What happened? Sakura waved her hand. Long story. The short version, the client lied about what we were up against. The bun-haired girl's face wrinkled in exasperation. Oh, one of those. Well, his whole country was in a bad way, so I get why he did it, but still. Sakura sighed. It took that to get him to teach us how to climb trees with chakra. Tenten seemed surprised, then frustrated. What? Are you kidding? That's one of the first things Guy-sensei taught us. Yeah, looking back, I thought that was something we should have worked on earlier. Ugh. The younger Kunoichi shook her head. Well, at least he's actually trying now. Really drove us into the ground the other day. It's tough, but I think it's better than him leaving us to train by ourselves unless it's literally life and death. Suddenly, I find myself appreciating Guy-sensei. Tenten said dully. Just a little. Sakura smirked. My other teammate is Naruto Uzumaki. Remember the kid who graffitied the Hokage monument? Tenten chuckled. Oh geez, how can I forget? Still can't believe no one noticed until he was almost done. He's a show-off and a loudmouth, and he can be kinda stupid, but he's the kind of guy who's always willing to lend a hand to someone in need. Though I only saw that recently, she said, thinking of how determined he was to pull Inari from his isolation and despair. Well, sounds like your team got off to a rough start. Here's hoping better days are ahead, she said, raising her dango in mock salute. Here, here. The next day once again saw the 3 genin of Team 7 waiting on their sensei in the 3rd training ground, clearly in no rush to break his habit of being late all the time. Today, however, things were much quieter than usual. Usually, Naruto and Sakura would be climbing up the walls, railing against Kakashi for keeping them waiting. Again. Not today, however, but the reason why had both Sasuke and Sakura raising a brow. Today, Naruto had his nose buried in a book, as did the pink-haired girl. Well, not just that. He was also writing things out, occasionally looking back to his book and grumbling at some imperfection in his work. Naruto had to admit he could understand why they were surprised. He was the dead last in the academy, and he usually blew off studying when it wasn't about ninjutsu or something cool. It did somewhat surprise him that Sasuke was the first to voice his curiosity. "What are you doing, Naruto?" Eh. Naruto looked up from his work, eyebrows raised that the question came from Sasuke before he shrugged. "Oh, I'm just working on my sealing jutsu. Kakashi-sensei told me to write out the symbols until I memorized what they mean. They're not all kanji, you know? But he's having me practice writing that out too. Need to get it all down as fast and neat as possible. One wrong symbol, and the whole thing falls apart. He gave me some low-level seals to work out when I think I'm up to it. Thought I could get a little extra practice, and since we've got nothing better to do." Sasuke gave a grunt of acknowledgement and looked away, satisfied with the answer. The blonde went back to his work. 2 more hours went by before their sensei deigned to show himself, walking into the clearing as if nothing was wrong. "Morning, guys," he said with a wave. "Late as always," Naruto accused, pointing at him. "Are you ever going to be on time?" Sakura yelled, raising a fist. Sasuke's expression said that he'd enjoyed the quiet while it had lasted. "Well, at least this time you two had something to keep you occupied," Kakashi commented before his gaze turned to the Uchiha heir. "Give you any ideas, Sasuke?" Sasuke grunted in response before saying, "A few." "Well, that's good. At least you won't all be standing around wasting time just waiting every day. You're the reason we're always waiting." Naruto and Sakura cried in unison. Now, let's not point fingers," Kakashi said with his eye smile. "Now then, for today we'll—" Actually, sensei," Sakura interrupted, raising her hand as if they were still in the academy. "I've got something to add to our training." Naruto looked at Sakura in mild shock. Even Sasuke raised a brow. It was pretty clear to anyone who spent time with her that Sakura didn't do much training. After all, back in Wave after she got to the top of the tree, rather than continuing to practice or doing something else, she'd just stopped training altogether. Looking back, maybe he should have said something about that. "Oh," Kakashi seemed interested. Sakura picked up a bag she'd brought with her and reached inside, pulling out wrist and arm guards. "You got us protective gear?" Sasuke asked skeptically. "They're a lot more than that," Sakura replied. "They're actually training weights. This gear's lined with seals that get heavier the more chakra you put in them, so you can control how much they weigh you down. You can release it all like a sealing scroll to return them to normal." She smiled. "I got a complete set for each of us while I was out the other day." "Oh, wow. Yeah, that was one way to speed up your training. And it was a gift from Sakura. Awesome." He was already planning to wear them whenever he wasn't on a mission or something, not to mention taking a look at those seals. Even Sasuke looked mildly impressed. "Wow, thanks, Sakura," Naruto said as he took his. "Yeah, thanks," Sasuke added, looking a bit impressed. "Don't mention it. I was trying to find a way to hit the ground running with my training and thought it sounded like something we could all use." She handed Sasuke his set, which took them and regarded them inquisitively. Sakura rubbed the back of her head sheepishly. "I didn't really know where to start, but I was lucky enough to run into this older girl named Tenten, and she showed me these and gave me a lot of advice." "Tenten," Kakashi spoke up. Sakura nodded. "Yeah, but she said I should run it all by you before I did anything serious, so I don't strain myself." "Good advice. This Tenten-sensei wouldn't happen to be named Guy, would he?" Sakura nodded. "That's him." "Huh. You know this guy Kakashi-sensei?" Naruto blinked in surprise. "I do. He's my self-proclaimed eternal rival." The silver-haired man replied, shaking his head. "He routinely challenges me to any sort of contest and won't take no for an answer. When it's my turn to pick, I usually ask for something quick and simple. I've even gotten him to settle for a match of rock, paper, scissors." He mused, causing his students to look at him incredulously. "He's eccentric, but he's easily one of the greatest taijutsu masters around. Not just here in Konoha, but in the entire shinobi world." "Whoa," Naruto said in awe. "Yeah, that's in line with what Tenten told me," Sakura commented. "She was pretty surprised when I told her you were my sensei, but she didn't say anything about the whole eternal rivals bit." "Did she offer any other advice?" Kakashi asked. Sakura seemed to shrink in on herself. "She told me I needed to stop dieting. And it looked like she was taking that to heart, too, from how she grimaced. Good. He'd seen how little she ate in Wave when she started to worry about her weight and wondered how she got by. Dieting didn't make any sense to him in the first place. As long as you didn't eat like Choji, you'd burn through whatever you ate fast enough, as a shinobi anyway. And a few other pointers after I told her how lax you'd been so far. Kakashi suddenly tensed, sucking in a quick breath. You told Guy's student about my teaching? Yeah. Kakashi buried his face in his hand. Oh, terrific. If she mentions this to Guy, I'll never hear the end of it. He'll probably run straight to my house with tears in his eyes, screaming about youth dulling or something. Ugh, he'll probably try to pull me into one of his hugs. Sasuke and Sakura stared at their sensei, exasperated at the Jonin's antics while Naruto snickered. Sounded like this guy was going to be a handful for his teacher. Served him right for leaving them hanging all the time. Kakashi took a deep breath. Well, nothing to do about it now, but hope for the best. Now then, since Sakura was so generous as to get you these gifts, it'd be remiss not to make use of them. Let's take a moment to see what you can handle. Then you'll be wearing them for all of our training today. I'll work out how I want you to handle them outside my supervision by tomorrow. All right, I think that's good for today. Kakashi mused as he looked over his students some 5 hours later. He clapped his hands, a signal for the various clones Naruto had training to disperse. The blonde swayed on his feet for a moment. Weariness washed over him as everything the clones had gained poured into his mind along with all their combined exhaustion. But it was nothing he couldn't handle. After swaying on his feet for a moment, he righted himself. He wiped the sweat off the side of his head with his sleeve as he reviewed what they'd gained. It wasn't much. They'd only sliced about a quarter of the way through the paper, but that was progress. He and his clones were getting the hang of water walking too, slightly faster than Sasuke too. Nice. Although, the fact that he was more or less getting 5 times the work in, plus more as his clones kept at it once they moved on to Taijutsu, had something to do with it. Of course, Sakura already had it down. And wow, did her gift make things harder, but no pain, no gain. He'd gladly wear these weights all day long if it meant he could be the awesome ninja he dreamed of being. Good work today, especially you, Sakura. It's good to see you're turning over a new leaf, Kakashi said, looking down at the pink-haired girl. Once again, Sakura had worn herself ragged and was currently lying on her back, staring at the sky. Naruto winced as he looked at her. He hoped she adjusted soon. I'm going to have to if I want to stop being dead weight, Sakura grumbled. Sakura, Naruto started. Naruto, don't. Sakura waved him off as she sat up, wincing slightly. I know what you're going to say, and thank you. But I know I've got a lot of catching up to do. To Sasuke and you. She then looked up with determination. But I will. I'll work as hard it takes so that I don't drag you two down next time we're in trouble. Naruto wasn't sure what to say. In the end, he just settled for smiling at her determination to get stronger for their sakes. Surprisingly, Sasuke did too. Oh, by the way, Kakashi began. I imagine those training tools cost a small fortune. Sakura cringed, proving him right. To have bought 3 sets like that, I'm guessing you've pretty much wiped out all your funds, haven't you? Sakura hung her head, a cloud of woe hovering over her as she began poking the ground and mumbling to herself. Wait, Sakura, you mean you totally broke your bank getting these for us? Naruto asked, his eyes wide. Sasuke raised a brow as he looked at the pink-haired girl. Sakura, you know you could have asked me, right? This wouldn't have made a dent in my funds. I know, Sakura replied listlessly. Whoa, hang on. You didn't have to do that for us. Take them. Oh, they probably won't give you your money back since we've already used them, will they? Then, how much was it? I'll pay you for mine, Naruto said. That's all right, she replied. Sasuke frowned. I don't. Listen, Sakura said, standing back up. This is something I wanted to do. I saw how this could help all of us and decided to go for it, so that we could be the best team we could be. Just take it as me doing my part for Team 7. That silenced all future arguments from him. And Sasuke, from the looks of it. After a moment, Naruto replied, well, guess I'll have to do my part too somehow. I'll think of something. Sasuke gave an affirmative. You know, the timing for this couldn't be better, Kakashi said, drawing their attention. You see, they finally finished processing Zabuza's body today, and so I got my bounty, though the village did keep half of it, as always. Good for you, Sensei, Naruto grumbled, crossing his arms. Kakashi nodded. Normally, A bounty is divided between all involved in actually defeating the ninja in question, so of course it all went to me, Kakashi said, closing his eye. But since I wouldn't have survived my first bout with Zabuza without quick thinking on Naruto and Sasuke's part, and I should have pulled us back from that mission before then. Wait, was he saying? Kakashi, I smiled and held up 3 slips of paper. I decided we should split it. Wow, for real? Naruto cried, smiling widely, his fists balled before him in excitement. Wow, why, but I dash. Sakura stammered. Sakura, Kakashi interrupted. I know what you're going to say, but this is my money. Just like the money you spent on the weights was yours. If I feel like sharing it with you, it's my choice. If you feel you haven't earned it, then just keep working like you have been these past few days and prove my faith in you isn't misplaced. Oh dash, okay, sensei, Sakura replied. Come on, Sakura, be more excited, Naruto said as he reached up to take his check. We're getting. Naruto trailed off into an exclamation of shock. He stared down at the paper grasped in both his hands with his mouth wide open, his eyes wide open pits of solid white. Huh, what is? Then Sakura got her check. Her reaction mirrored his. As the two stared, stupefied at their rewards, Sasuke simply raised a brow and pocketed his own. Naruto came out of his stupor first. Kakashi-sensei, thank you so much. He cheered among numerous praises as he threw himself at his sensei and hugged his waist. Hey, get off of me. Kakashi tried to shake him off before finally managing to pry him away, sitting him down with the indifferent Sasuke and slowly recovering Sakura. Now, just do me a favor and don't spend it frivolously. Keep most of it for what you need or things you think will help with your training. And please, don't gamble with it. Or at least do so responsibly if you can't resist. Don't be like Lady Tsunade. Huh, Tsunade? Naruto questioned. Really? Sakura questioned incredulously. Naruto, she's one of the legendary Sannin, 3 of the strongest shinobi our village ever produced. She's the granddaughter of the first Hokage and one of the students of Lord 3rd Hokage. Her teammate trained the 4th. Whoa. Indeed. And I see we'll have to brush up on your recent history too. Lady Tsunade's every bit the kunoichi her reputation paints her as. Kakashi acknowledged with a nod. However, she has one problem she's not so well known around here for. You see, she has a chronic gambling addiction. She simply can't help herself. That wouldn't be so bad, I suppose. There are worse vices, but it's coupled with some of the worst luck known to man. She always loses but can't stop herself. This unfortunate combination has earned her another nickname throughout the elemental nations. He paused, letting the suspense build. For once, even with the mask, they could tell he was smiling. They thought they might have even seen him shake as he held back a laugh. The legendary sucker. Sasuke and Sakura looked very unimpressed with this part of Tsunade's legend, while Naruto cracked up in laughter. Naruto sighed as he pulled out another weed and tossed it into the plastic bag hanging from his shoulder. It had been a few days after Sakura had given their team that gear. Kakashi had been putting them through some pretty tough exercises and taijutsu drills, made even harder by the weights. Not that any of them were complaining. They'd all been just a bit unsteady on their feet after all was said and done, and more so after his clones dispersed, but they all felt good about how things were going. After half an hour of rest, they'd been off to do a D-rank mission. Couldn't put those off forever, could they? Honestly, missions like this seem to drag on forever. Pull out one weed. Oh hey, there's a few dozen more. Get them all. Time to get started on the next area. Got that done. Great job. You're about 1/10 of the way there. It didn't help that Kakashi had forbidden them all from using jutsu to speed things up. Something about teaching them a lesson in patience. Bah. Yeah, I get you, Sakura said, obviously having heard his sigh. Just grin and bear it like any other D-rank. Just think, some people do this for a living. It's not so bad when you keep that in mind. Maybe, but I get the feeling a professional would never let it get like this in the first place, Naruto grumbled. Keep it down, Naruto. The client might hear you. The pink-haired girl hissed at him. Naruto shrugged. I call it like I see it. Besides, she's inside and the doors and windows are closed. I can't see how she'd hear me unless I screamed it from the rooftop. You have a point. Still, Sakura replied with a sigh of her own. She then spied what he was doing. Wait a second. Huh, Naruto looked up just as he was about to pluck a small yellow flower from the ground. He didn't know a lot about plants, but he knew enough to know these were weeds, and they spread fast if you let them. We might need to ask the client about those, Sakura said, cupping her chin. Dandelions are technically weeds, but they have their uses. They attract bees to pollinate flowers, and their roots can draw up nutrients for other plants. She might want those left alone. Naruto blinked, his eyebrows rising. Wow, Sakura, you really know your stuff. Sakura rubbed the back of her head sheepishly and looked away with a slight grimace. Not really. I used to be friends with Ino, remember? Her family runs a flower shop. I just picked up a few things. Oh, Naruto cringed. That was probably a sore subject. I really need to patch things up with her, Sakura admitted. But I've got no idea where to start. Not when I was the one who broke up our friendship. She looked down at that, her face melancholy. Naruto guessed she was probably thinking of past times with Ino, and probably the day they went their separate ways. Over Sasuke. But this was the first he was hearing that she was the one to end things. Yeah, he got the feeling that fixing that wasn't going to be easy. Well, you won't know until you try, right? That's what Tenten said. Oh, did you meet with her again? Sakura nodded, seeming to brighten up a little. Yeah, she's been giving me some good advice. And it's nice to actually hang out with a girl my age again, or anyone outside class really. Wait, had Ino been her only friend? And she chose to fight with her over Sasuke. Huh. Well, he could agree on how great it was to finally have people to spend time with. He knew personally that being alone absolutely sucked. At least she had people she could talk to at the academy. Most of the other kids just put him down aside from Shikamaru and Choji, and they hadn't exactly talked much. Well anyway, what's the worst that could happen? She says, screw you and walks off? At least then you can say you tried. You won't get anywhere if you just think about it all the time. Naruto said before giving her a thumbs up. And worst comes the worst, you still have us. And Tenten, right? Yeah, I guess so. Thanks. Things were going pretty well for his team now. Kakashi couldn't help but think as he neared his home. Naruto was handling the shadow clone training method well, as in he wasn't collapsing immediately after every session. Though, today's conversation told him he'd need to improve the blonde's knowledge of recent history as well as his vocabulary. Actually, better make that history in general. It also might be a good idea to get his students their own copies of the bingo book. It was a little early, sure, but having knowledge of who's who in the shinobi world couldn't hurt. It was good to see Sakura step up on her own. He'd been sure he'd have to take her aside at some point and hammer home how badly she'd needed to improve, but thankfully that had worked itself out. Shame it took was a near-death experience for his whole team, but the emphasis was on near there. And she'd apparently stopped dieting. That was good, though time would tell if she'd slipped back into old habits. Hopefully, now that Sakura was actually training and her body was getting the fuel it needs, her physical energy would improve. She definitely had more than enough mental energy, and with that, her stores of chakra would start to see improvement. Nothing too drastic. Sakura would never have Sasuke's reserves, never mind Naruto's, but hopefully, he'd soon be able to say they were better than abysmal. As for Naruto, he got the feeling he'd take to Sakura's gift like a duck to water. Good. With his healing power, he probably didn't have to worry about the usual drawbacks, not to mention the aches and pains that came with overdoing it. He'd have to take Naruto aside and tell him to push things a little harder, and maybe in a few weeks up the number of shadow clones. And for Sasuke, maybe some tutoring on making use of his Sharingan's Genjutsu was in order. They were doing good, but they'd need to be better for the upcoming Chunin exams, and they only had about a month and a half. Finally arriving at his door, he reached for the knob. And suddenly, a sound reached his ears. Loud, pounding footsteps that likely echoed through the whole city block. He turned to the source of the sound to see a massive dust cloud rushing towards him. And at its front was a tall man, well-muscled but not overly so. He had a strong jawline, black hair shaped into a bowl cut, and, perhaps his most distinguishing feature, sported a massive pair of thick eyebrows. He wore a standard Konoha flak jacket over a green jumpsuit with orange leg warmers, rather than the blue shirt and pants most Konoha shinobi wore. A red forehead protector was tied around his waist like a belt. Kakashi, he bellowed, and as he grew near, The silver-haired man could see that there were streams of tears falling from his eyes like waterfalls. "Oh no,"